the Imperial Era from scratch. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 126 Fantastic Beasts in Winter. Exploring the winter forest proved more difficult than expected. David led his group northward for a day, discovering that the previously flat terrain became increasingly complex as they advanced. The surrounding landscape became undulating, with numerous hills and low mountains appearing. Is it really necessary to continue? Floyd felt that there was no need to continue. With such complex terrain, deep in the freezing forest, only a fool would establish a village here. David, realizing this, called a halt and chose a relatively flat, open area. He had the soldier carrying the sign set up the sign and wooden plank marking the northern outpost and border of Winter Town. Let's rest here for the night. Although it was already spring, the weather in Winter Town was still quite chilly, and after a day's march north, David felt the temperature drop even further. If they continued north, they might reach the polar regions, where ice and snow lingered year-round. Is that place the North Pole of this world? He glanced at the distant mountain, which seemed to remain at the same distance from him, as if he had never approached it. Then we have to at least get out of this forest first. Laura and David stood together, gazing at the distant peak. Speaking of which, I'm really interested in that peak. I really want to climb it. David was just in a moment of silent contemplation for the distant peak when Laura suddenly stomped on his foot. What's wrong? You were saying bad things about me in your mind. You really were saying bad things about me in your mind. David covered his face and could only lead Laura on a stroll around the makeshift camp, exploring the surroundings and looking for any pets he could catch. Their luck seemed to be lacking. They didn't catch any wild animals nearby, but they did manage to hunt a few rabbits. With the rabbits back at camp, along with a large fish Leon and Clausa had caught in the river, they had a hearty dinner. Seeing that it was getting dark, everyone sat down by the blazing bonfire. After dinner, the two soldiers patrolled around the makeshift camp to ensure its safety. Floyd stood guard beside David, his eyes occasionally glancing at the two soldiers not far away to make sure that nothing unexpected happened during their normal patrol. David was chatting with Leon and Clausa, but it was basically Leon who asked the questions and David and Laura who answered. Clausa was very silent. He mostly listened, occasionally interrupting to ask questions he didn't understand, or the details of certain things. After chatting for a while, Clausa also had a general understanding of this world. The continent of Brunia, the Kingdom of Tiran, the Kingdom of Holigond, the Empire of Sotaranma, and the New Alan Federation. Magicians, alchemists, temple priests. Krauser was most concerned about the various major powers and the situation at Iron Tree Keep, especially the situation around Wintertown. He had realized that the Baron of Glamorgan, whom he served, currently faced the greatest enemy, the nobles of Iron Tree Keep. Wintertown would soon be battling these nobles for the vast expanse of land on the northern plains. And the elves and the orcs. David didn't elaborate on these two races, but Krauser knew they posed a greater threat than even the nobles. Krauser was most curious about their combat effectiveness. In contrast, Leon was more intrigued by creatures unseen on Earth, such as the local giant wolf. Laura came out this time hoping to catch a northern giant wolf, but her luck seems to be lacking. Forgetting northern giant wolves, even ordinary gray wolves were nowhere to be found. David glanced at Laura, who was standing next to him in silver and white armor, and suggested a different target. Maybe you could consider catching a white tiger or something. Do you have a white tiger? While it might be a Tyrant imitation, a white tiger was a good option. Of course, I haven't found any yet. If I see one, I'll help you catch one. However, for the next 2 days, not only were there no white tigers or northern giant wolves, but even rabbits were nowhere to be found. David and Laura returned disappointed, arriving back in Wintertown on the evening of the 4th day after leaving. As they emerged from the forest, Laura proudly declared that she would find time to return to the forest to search for a suitable pet and would not give up until she found one she was satisfied with. Keep going, David offered Laura some emotional support. He glanced at his own territory. It was still a busy construction site, but compared to a few days ago, there was a special element. Is that Eevee? David looked at a brown Pokemon not far away, staring at him. It looked like a fox wearing a scarf, and then thought of Squirtle, whom he had asked to bring more Pokemon. I suddenly feel that this little guy is much stronger than the northern wolf, After seeing Squirtle, Laura also looked up information about Pokemon. Of course, she knew about this Pokemon called Eevee, but she felt that such a cute creature should not be brought out to fight enemies. Even though she knew that Pokemon were unique creatures with many magical abilities and powerful combat capabilities. It's so cute, I can't bear to let them fight humans. Laura wanted to tease the Eevee, but the Eevee in front of her didn't recognize the group and kept a safe distance, not letting anyone approach. She didn't insist on catching the Eevee. She continued to follow David towards Winter Town, constantly looking around, and sure enough, she saw several Squirtle by the river. It looks like Squirtle brought a lot of its compatriots, as well as a small number of other Pokemon. In that case, it might be hard to tell which one is the original Squirtle. Laura looked at them for a long time and felt that these Squirtle all looked similar. When they were gathered together, she couldn't tell which one was the Squirtle that could travel back and forth between the two worlds. That's easy. David came up with an idea. We'll know by dinner time, and then give that Squirtle some special equipment to make it easier to tell them apart. Oh? What? Sunglasses? Thinking of the group of Squirtle wearing sunglasses in the plot, they were very distinctive, or bow tie, an armband, or something like that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Laura planned to arrange these things for the Squirtle after returning. But after observing for a while, she noticed that besides Squirtle, there were only a few Eevee and no other Pokemon. It seems that the main group of Pokemon coming this time are Squirtle. Yes, David observed. Then there's no need to worry about fires in the town. In the Pokemon world, Squirtle serves as firefighters, a job perfectly suited for them. Furthermore, the growing farmland could be watered with Squirtle's help. It seems we need to emphasize the importance of protecting these little creatures in the town. After all, Winter Town is no longer a small village with only a few people. With hundreds of people, there's no guarantee that everyone has the same ideas. There's always the possibility that someone might see these strange creatures and become curious about what they taste like. If someone still does something like this despite being warned, they could certainly be severely punished. But if they haven't even been warned, then there's no need for the residents to be wary. So, upon discovering the increased number of Pokemon in town, David's first act upon returning was to have Eva write a notice and post it on the bulletin board outside the cafeteria. Due to Winter Town's unique circumstances, the residents had a high literacy rate, so he didn't have to worry about anyone not understanding. Furthermore, if Eva and Mark emphasized this, and if he took Squirtle to help with chores like watering the fields, even if the residents didn't immediately embrace the creatures as family, they certainly wouldn't be curious about whether they were delicious. Seeing David assigning Eva various tasks, Laura said hello and went out to look for Eevee. Even if she wasn't planning on using him as a battle pet, she could still feed him. Who wouldn't want to pet such a cute little creature? Where's Mark? He's in his cabin. He seems to be having some realizations lately. He might be on the verge of attaining some kind of power. Eva spoke with envy. The longer she stayed in Winter Town and the more she learned about the mysterious power, the more she longed to obtain it. Although she had initially been able to remain calm, as she watched everyone she knew acquire certain abilities, that composure gradually shattered. Seeing Eva staring intently at him, David remembered his earlier promise to help Eva choose a power to learn and master. It had been a while since he'd returned, but he hadn't even thought about it. Ahem, he coughed awkwardly. He didn't admit he'd forgotten, but instead asked Eva if she'd decided on a power. If you don't have a preference, then I can only suggest Holy Light. Holy Light is great, she smiled brightly. Eva truly believed Holy Light was a good choice. After all, even the Lord of Winter, Baron Glamorgan, wielded it. Learning Holy Light on her own would allow her to consult David nearby. Learning other abilities would require her to explore on her own. As for Paladin or Priest, before truly mastering the power of Holy Light, Eva didn't need to rush into choice. She could even choose to master both, like David had done. After all, Winter Town was full of Holy Light users, and no one was prepared to embrace it as their personal faith. After explaining the key points of cultivating the Holy Light, David asked Eva to first try to see if she could sense the Holy Light herself. If not, David would then instill the Holy Light into her. While David was teaching Eva, Fording, who had not been seen for a long time, returned. Chapter 127 Fording's Choice. You're back. He wore a Lightbringer suit, clutching the violet-blue crystal warhammer Will had crafted specifically for him. His battle-scarred white cape fluttered gently in the wind. How was your trip to the capital? David hadn't returned yet when Fording had last visited Winterhold to report his safety. This was Fording's first reunion with David since returning to Hearthland to fight the Scourge. Not bad. David and Fording began chatting as they sat down at the wooden table where they usually ate together. This is Winterhold now. In that case, you should be a noble of the Kingdom of Tiran, right, Baron, and even got the surname of Glamorgan. David, Baron Glamorgan, Fording repeated twice. Sounds good. David smiled awkwardly, unsure how to explain to Fording how unlucky the surname was, so he changed the subject and asked about Fording's situation. Much better than I expected, Fording pointed at himself. I can tell from my condition. Yes, you look quite well. David didn't experience the expected lethargy or loss of appetite due to the dire situation. As Fording recounted his story, David realized that the situation wasn't simply better than he'd anticipated. Having understood the plot and made advanced preparations, Fording had essentially managed to predict the outcome of the battle based on his best-case scenario. Having successfully avoided the chaos of the plague outbreak and the subsequent Scourge invasion, Fording returned to Hearthland and took control, establishing a formidable defense. By the time the Scourge finally assembled, despite their impressive numbers, they were unable to pose a real threat to Hearthland under the barrage of artillery and firearms. The few Scourge soldiers who managed to survive the barrage were quickly annihilated by the Silver-Hands Paladins. Furthermore, the Iron-Forged dwarves deployed increasing numbers of artillerymen, along with dwarven musketeers armed with improved Garand rifles, significantly strengthening the defenses of Hearthland's walls. Hearthland had become the safest place in Lordaeron, and Fordring's reputation within Hearthland, and even within the kingdom itself, had returned to its peak. As more Lordaeron refugees fled into Hearthland, including Kalia Menethil, a member of the Lordaeron royal family, Fordring began to consider a counterattack against the Scourge. Helicopters are being mass-produced in Ironforge, Fordring said, discussing the upcoming battle. I plan to wait until enough attack helicopters arrive in Hearthland before launching a counterattack against the Scourge. With sufficient air support, we can absolutely wipe out the Scourge. Although the dwarves deployed flying units and artillery in the original Warcraft story, and dwarven riflemen were a key unit for the Alliance, it was definitely not like this. According to Fordring, the Alliance forces in Hearthland now routinely plow the ground with artillery fire upon the start of a battle, followed by the Paladins taking the lead in clearing the battlefield. A simple, crude tactic, but particularly effective against the Scourge. Whereas Arthas, with Fording's style of attack, wouldn't Arthas be reduced to smithereens by Hearthland's heavy artillery? Upon hearing Arthas's name, Fording shook his head helplessly. That's what I'm most worried about right now, in a world where transcendental individuals exist. Powerful individuals can have a significant impact on the war. Furthermore, the Kingdom of Lordaeron is still a relatively primitive nation, making the movement of heavy artillery a complex undertaking. Therefore, Fording's current successes were achieved thanks to the Hearthland defenses he had prepared in advance. A proactive attack would mean giving up one's greatest advantage. If Arthas suddenly emerged and launched a surprise attack against the remaining Knights of the Silver Hand, there's a high chance the tide of battle would be turned. The most terrifying thing about the Scourge is that the more they fight, the more numerous and powerful they become. A comrade fighting alongside you against the Scourge one moment could become a Scourge member the next, brandishing their weapon against you. In such a situation, even someone as brave as Fording would have to be extremely cautious, fearing an irreparable mistake. So, you're waiting for the new attack helicopters from Ironforge? Yes, Fordring was also contacting the Wildhammer dwarves, hoping to gain their assistance, as they possessed flying combat units like the Griffin Riders. It sounds like everything is going well. After listening to Fordring's account, David felt that the situation in Azeroth was quite good. At this rate, the Kingdom of Lordaeron would surely survive. After the war, Tyrion Fordring, who had made great contributions, would place Kalia Menethil on the throne, and he himself would at least be able to assume the position of regent. With Fordring, a paladin with great popularity, strength, and integrity, it was not impossible for the Kingdom of Lordaeron to recover and return to its peak. After all, the Scourge's recent devastation had also severely damaged several of Lordaeron's neighboring kingdoms. Lordaeron would not have to worry about foreign invasion for a long time to come. The greatest challenge facing this human kingdom is the devastation left by the Scourge, leaving the land barren and desolate. The once fertile East Wildred has become a plague-ridden land, teeming with mutated creatures. It hasn't all been smooth sailing, Fording observed David's thoughts. After discussing the smooth sailing, he finally addressed the challenging times. I can only defend Hearthglen and protect the growing number of Lordaeron residents. I don't have the resources to rescue others, so, I think Arthas, who hasn't appeared on the battlefield in Hearthglen, is likely leading some Scourge soldiers to attack Quel'Thalas. After all, the sun-willing Quel'Thalas is Arthas's most important objective. Arthas, still serving under the Lich King, was ordered to capture the Sunwell and resurrect the Lich Kel'Thuzad. Facing a prolonged siege on Hearthglen, his only option was to leave enough troops to continue the assault on Hearthglen while he led the remaining forces to attack Quel'Thalas. So, Arthas might be waiting outside Hearthglen, waiting for you to lead your troops out and launch a surprise attack. Or he might abandon Hearthglen and attack Quel'Thalas directly. The two men stared at each other for a few seconds. David felt he couldn't tell what Arthas was thinking. But he sensed Fordring's dilemma. Fordring believed Arthas's attack on Quel'Thalas was highly likely, but he couldn't take the risk. Behind him lay the last hope of Lordaeron. His duty was to protect that hope, not to lead all his troops out of Hearthglen to rescue Quel'Thalas. If Arthas was indeed attacking Quel'Thalas, then everything would be easy. He could use the situation to attack from both sides with the elves of Quel'Thalas. But what if this was truly a trap for Fordring and the humans of Hearthglen? Frankly, Fordring couldn't afford to take even a 1% chance of falling for it, and the odds were far lower. My personal suggestion is to continue defending Hearthglen. David believed this was the safest strategy. As long as he held Hearthglen, with the arrival of various equipment and reinforcements from other races, Fordring could steadily eliminate the Scourge bit by bit. This was a surefire strategy, especially given the knowledge of the subsequent plot. After Arthas resurrected Kel'Thuzad, he would attack the mage city of Dalaran and then open a portal to welcome Archimonde. After Archimonde arrived on Azeroth, Arthas and the Scourge were left aside. Then came the internal strife between the Burning Legion and the Scourge, and heroes from Azeroth's major races joined forces to fight the Legion. That would be the perfect time for Fordring to launch a counterattack. As for Quel'Thalas and Dalaran, Fordring was the Lord of Hearthglen and a noble of the Kingdom of Lordaeron, not the Lord of Quel'Thalas or Dalaran. Yes, it's a safe choice, but is it truly the right one? Tyrion Fordring expressed frustration for the first time today. As a paladin with a strong sense of morality and honor, he felt he had made a less than ideal choice. If those additional factors weren't considered, given Tyrion Fordring's character, upon learning what Arthas was about to do, he would undoubtedly have rushed to Arthas and slew the former Prince of Lordaeron, now the Kingslayer. But was he wrong? It didn't seem like he had done anything wrong. This situation, where no matter which option he chose, it seemed to be wrong, made him feel very uncomfortable. Seeing Fordring's distressed expression, David thought for a few seconds before finally saying, "Actually, just follow your heart." Tyrion Fordring glanced at David, confirming that he wasn't just offering comfort but genuine support. "I thought you'd give me some advice." David was speechless. It seemed Fordring had returned to Winterfell hoping for some persuasion, to strengthen his resolve to defend Hearthglen, rather than running out to fight Arthas to the death and risk the entire Kingdom of Lordaeron's last hope. Fordring hadn't expected David, after seeing his dilemma, to actually support him in following his true heart. "Is this something to be surprised about?" "No, it was my negligence." Fordring smiled, a smile that came from the heart. "You have persisted for 2 years in this land with a lack of food and very cold in order to make yourself live a satisfactory. Yes, you can be mean to others, but you can't be mean to yourself." David stretched out his hand and shook hands with Fordring's big hand. "Besides, my friends and I will support you." When their hands were held together, David vaguely felt something. Chapter 128 Mark receives a big gift package. What? David's momentary pause was unmistakable, but Fordring's gaze couldn't escape his gaze. "Did you feel anything again?" Fordring, Laura, and Mark, the people who had spent the most time with David, all had some suspicions about his condition. However, some things were better left unspoken than spoken. The reason he suddenly asked this question was primarily because David's previous unwavering support had made Fordring very happy. With such a true friend, he felt less reserved. "Nothing, it's just," as David shook Fordring's hand, scenes suddenly flashed before his eyes, one unfamiliar yet somehow familiar. They depicted scenes he had never really seen, yet he had seen them countless times. Elwyn Forest, Westfall, Duskwood, the Plaguelands, Strathallam. Unlike the images he'd seen on his computer before, these were far more vivid and real. I'm not entirely sure, this was his first time encountering such a situation, and he felt a vague suspicion. Looking up at Fordring, David gestured with his hand and made a request. "Tyrion, could you take me over there?" "Of course, but it's not impossible." "You mean?" Fording saw David nod with uncertainty on his face and understood his reaction. "Let's give it a try. It won't delay anything." "Wait." David, to be on the safe side, decided to say hello first and knocked on Mark's door. "What's going on?" Mark opened the door and saw it was David. He was surprised that David would come knocking at his door at this time. "It must be something important. I need to run an experiment with Tyrion. I might be away for a while." "Leave? Where to?" Mark replied blankly, then realized something was wrong. Where could David go at this time? If the experiment was only being conducted near Wintertown, there was no need to specifically notify him. The fact that he'd come specifically to say hello meant it was something serious. "Count me in." David watched helplessly as Mark quickly changed his clothes, even bringing a pistol, and then exited the cabin, closing the door behind him. "I'm ready." David shook his head speechlessly, motioning for him to wait while he went to find Eva. After receiving his basic instruction, Eva returned to her cabin to attempt to comprehend the holy light, but was summoned by David just as she began. "If everything goes well, I'll be back soon." "Does that mean there might be problems?" "Probably not. I'm just giving you a heads up, just to be safe, so you don't get worried if you can't find me." "I understand." Eva understood that David wanted her to stay here. If anyone happened to come looking for him, or if David couldn't return immediately, she could say the Lord had left Wintertown for something urgent. As long as David and Fording were together, those who knew about the situation would naturally not worry about him. And people like Floyd knew that the Baron's departure wasn't a disaster, so they knew nothing would happen for at least a few days. "Let's go." After finishing his arrangements and looking around, seeing no sign of Laura, David looked at Mark. "Are you sure you want to follow? I don't know what will happen." "Aren't you afraid of missing communications with Earth? Then I'll have to live here forever." "Doesn't seem like a bad thing to me." Mark spread his hands. He had nothing to lose. "Then let's go." David and Mark looked at Fording, who in turn looked at David. The three of them stared at each other in silence for a long moment before Fording asked, "What should we do?" "Well, just like usual, thinking about returning to your world." David thought for a moment, and it was probably similar to Elizabeth following Will Tyran from Wintertown. "Mark and I will put our hands on your shoulders." Fording nodded, then turned and walked out of Wintertown. David and Mark each put their hands on Fording's shoulders and followed Fording. Soon, David's eyes blurred as the surrounding scenery suddenly transformed. Fording, standing in front of him, paused and glanced behind him. "Oh, we're really here," David and Mark realized. They were in Azeroth. They immediately looked around, taking in the unfamiliar place. An office, perhaps? The most striking feature was the massive desk and the vast bookshelves lined with books along the wall. "This is my office." After briefly explaining their location, Fording immediately asked David, "Do you want to try to get back?" "Yes, let's try. The sooner we understand the situation, the better we can decide what to do next." With Fording's cooperation, David and Mark made various attempts. Half an hour later, they had the basics. They could now, under Fording's guidance, reach Azeroth. Going back would be much simpler. Even without Fording's help, David and Mark could return at any time. However, if they wanted to return, they would still need Fording's guidance. "It feels strange, like I'm a villain who brought outsiders to Azeroth." "If you put it that way, wouldn't that make me an evil invader out to wreak havoc on Azeroth?" David thought Fording's analogy was inappropriate. His name wasn't Sargeras. "But in this situation, I think you can be more confident and bold in pursuing your own ideas." Fording smiled. If David, Steve, and the others could come to his aid, he could indeed be more daring. For example, completely slaying Arthas in the East Wilderness, thwarting the Burning Legion's plot beforehand, and denying Archimonde even the chance to enter Azeroth. Wouldn't that be a much better outcome for Azeroth? At least the Night Elves wouldn't have to sacrifice countless elven souls and the World Tree. As long as you're not worried about provoking the Bronze Dragon. Of course I don't care." David, clutching his hips, acted as if he couldn't possibly be afraid of those creatures. "I can always go back to Winterfell." Fording shook his head speechlessly, then looked at Mark. He noticed that Mark had become very quiet since arriving, which made him feel something was wrong. Mark was usually a very energetic young man, very good at entertaining himself. Even if he didn't say a word, he could still chat for a long time. "Mark, are you feeling unwell?" "No." Mark waved his hand. "I just vaguely feel that the land seems to be wailing." Since arriving in Azeroth, Mark had been able to hear faint weeping and wailing. Having studied shamanic lore, he immediately realized that these sounds came from the land beneath his feet, which was suffering from disaster. This, should I congratulate you, Fording immediately realized that Mark had taken a significant step in the shamanic path. After all, not everyone could hear the voice of the earth. Thank you. Mark was still somewhat affected by the earth's wailing. He felt a bit downbeat, the constant whining and complaining giving him a headache. At the same time, he realized why he'd been feeling so happy lately. It was because the land of Wintertown had always been sending him joy, and he was feeling a bit of that joy. At the time, he'd thought it was because Wintertown was improving and his future was bright, which was why he felt such genuine joy, completely unaware that he'd been communicating with the elements. With his experience in Azeroth, he finally understood his own situation. Next, he could begin to cultivate and learn the knowledge of shamanism according to the materials. Just as he was thinking this, the still wailing earth transmitted something to him. Confused, Mark tried to read the information and was surprised to find it contained a wealth of knowledge about shamanism, mixed with hope and expectation, as if hoping that Mark would quickly learn this knowledge and resolve his own ailments. After sharing their story, Fording and David were speechless. Mark had only come to this world out of curiosity, only to receive a quest from the elemental spirits. He hadn't even started the quest yet, and the reward package had already arrived. I can only say, he's worthy of being the protagonist. David began to wonder. If Steve came to Azeroth, would Ellen reveal her true form? And Peggy and Sharon were still hesitating about which power to choose. If they arrived in Azeroth, would they be instantly targeted by the Holy Light and Lightforged, lest such a talented person be snatched away? Why hasn't some force contacted me? My Holy Light talent is quite strong, after all, having copied Fording's talent, was it really that he was being looked down upon? David tried to close his eyes and try to gain some insight. It was just a casual experiment, but he seemed to hear a voice. Leave me alone, I haven't gotten enough sleep yet. David opened his eyes and noticed that Fording and Mark were staring at him. What's wrong? What did you hear? Or what did you sense? Mark pointed at David's face when asking, reminding him not to make up lies to fool him. Your expression has revealed everything. Did you gain any knowledge? No. David shook his head. He did not receive any so-called knowledge gift package, but just heard a message like that. I just feel that this world does not seem to welcome my arrival. Mark was confused by David's answer, and Fording next to him thought of something and looked at David in surprise. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129, The First Time Travelers Alliance Meeting. Thanks to his reading of the Chronicles, Fordring was arguably the most knowledgeable person in all of Azeroth. He could easily claim, no one knows Azeroth better than I do, so when David uttered that statement, he immediately understood the implications. Fordring hesitated for 2 seconds, ultimately not asking the question. Regardless of David's true nature, he was now merely a supportive partner willing to help him. He had long since realized that David wasn't an ordinary person. So, does this mean we can't stay in this world for long? Mark was concerned with a different question. Was David's perception a warning to outsiders not to come here unless necessary? I don't know, it shouldn't have any impact, right? David closed his eyes and pondered for a moment, but this time, he received no clear answer. We won't be staying here permanently anyway. David and Mark had come here primarily to test whether David's abilities had advanced further. Now that they had the answer, they now needed to consider how to help Fordring deal with Arthas and the Scourge. Should we go back to Winterfell and discuss this with everyone? Mark walked around Fording's office, then examined the map on his desk, which detailed Hearthland's defenses. Especially professionals like Steve and Peggy. Yes, we definitely need to discuss this with everyone. David enjoyed superhero movies and admired powerful heroes, but he never considered himself a lone hero. Even with his current strength, his mindset remained the same. There was no need to tackle a problem alone when multiple people could work together. Let's go back and talk to Laura, Steve, and the others about the situation here. David quickly made a decision. Should we also make some arrangements with Tiran? Yes, especially with my colleagues in the Knights of the Silver Hand. If Fording wanted to break out of Hearthland, he would have to discuss the details with the leaders of the major factions there. Hearthland currently housed various factions of Lordaeron, and they were willing to follow Tyrion Fordring's command when all their forces were combined for defense. However, if he wanted to launch other military operations, things would become much more complicated. The commanders of the Knights of the Silver Hand, the commanders of the Kingdom of Lordaeron's army, the commanders of the Dwarven forces, and especially Kalia, the last heir to the Menethil throne, Fordring would undoubtedly need the support of this princess if you were to launch a counterattack. Then make your own preparations. See you tomorrow. After conferring, David and Mark said goodbye to Fordring and returned directly to Winterstown. Upon their return, they found Eva chatting with Laura, accompanied by an EV. It seemed that after feeding Laura, the EV had lowered its guard towards Laura. "You're back." "Yeah." Laura looked at David and Mark, her hands on her hips expressing her dissatisfaction. "Why didn't you ask me to come along? I'm also interested in that world. This isn't a trip or adventure." David waved, then briefly described the situation on Fordring's side to Laura and Eva. The two women then realized that the war on Fordring's side had reached a critical juncture. The next decision could determine the future of the entire Eastern Kingdoms, and even the world of Azeroth. "What can we do to help?" Laura didn't know much about war, and she wasn't sure what role she could play in this one. "No matter what, just firmly support Tyrion," David thought carefully. For Fordring, Wintertown's military might could indeed provide some assistance to Hearthland, but the real key wasn't that, but moral support. Wintertown provided Fordring with a solid backing and served as his safest retreat. Even if he failed to defeat Arthas and gambled away his hard-won forces, he could always seek refuge in Wintertown with his remaining men and wait for the next opportunity. If losing this war meant the utter destruction of the Kingdom of Lordaeron, it wouldn't be David's words that would convince Fordring to fight Arthas to the death. "Let's get everyone here," David pondered. Regardless of whether he could help or not, he at least had to explain the situation to everyone. Laura, Eva, and Mark informed everyone currently in the village together at David's cabin. With so many people gathering at the Barrens, it was inevitable they would attract attention. David ordered Floyd and Gareth Stanton to patrol the cabin, preventing anyone from approaching. Jonah, Leon, who hadn't left yet and was chatting with Clauser and Jonah, Will Turner, Peggy Carter, Sharon Rogers, Eva, Laura, and Mark, and finally Edwin Van Cleef, were present. The few other worldly visitors currently in Wintertown, with the exception of Andrin, crowded into David's cabin, filling it to capacity. Everyone glanced at each other, quickly realizing that today's discussion was likely to be something major. Seeing that everyone had arrived, except for Ratchet and Steve, David signaled for silence and described the situation in Fordring. Leon and Clauser didn't rush to ask who Fordring was. Instead, they leaned against the wall near the door, quietly observing everyone present. As David spoke, they gradually understood that Tyrion Fordring, also from another world, was a powerful paladin of stature and power in their own. The power of the Holy Light, currently present in Wintertown, had been originally taught to David, the Lord, by Fordring. Now, that High Lord Paladin was about to face a crucial battle, and David had summoned these people, presumably to show his support. As David spoke, everyone quickly grasped the key point. David's power had been upgraded, granting them the opportunity to travel to other worlds. It dawned on everyone, no wonder David had summoned everyone so suddenly. This was the key. Everyone looked at each other, including Leon and Clauser, realizing the significance of David's power upgrade. Every single one of them had become beings free to travel to other worlds, no longer confined to the continent of Brunia, where Wintertown lay, or to their own original world. For example, if Laura feels her world no longer has tombs worth destroying, she could explore Azeroth and team up with Bran Bronzebird and Lore Walker Josho. Someone like Sharon, unable to return to her own world for some inexplicable reason, could explore other worlds and relax. Perhaps they'd unknowingly resolve their own problems and return home. And Peggy, trapped in an unknown dimension, could contact the Ancient One through Steve, travel to her world, and help her resolve her problems, returning to her home on Earth. In short, with David's increased power, some previously difficult problems have become easily solvable, and some people have more options. Of course, they shouldn't rush into these matters right now. They should focus on discussing Fordring's situation. Clearly unify our internal thinking. In terms of combat capability, those present could offer little. Even in terms of battlefield command, Peggy, who had never truly commanded a large-scale force, and Sharon, a super soldier with no command experience at all, couldn't offer much. Even as extraordinary combatants participating in that battle, Neither of them was strong enough to determine the outcome of such a major battle. Not to mention, the other people present weren't nearly as powerful as these two. It could be said that the greatest role of those in Wintertown was to facilitate the rapid evacuation of those in Hearthland if the situation changed. Working together, they could bring people to Wintertown more quickly, though it hadn't been tested yet. Bringing ordinary people here would likely require direct contact. Besides, I might be traveling to Azeroth frequently for a while. This was David's main reason for gathering everyone, to inform them of his whereabouts in advance. If the Lord wasn't in Wintertown, he'd gone to Azeroth to help Fordring, so there was no need to worry. As for David's safety, he had just said that David could return here at any time, and if things weren't going well, he could just run back. I think, David, you don't need to stay there long unless it's important. Instead, we should take turns guarding Tirian's side. Peggy pondered for a moment and offered her suggestion. If there's an emergency, you can return immediately to inform everyone and prepare accordingly. Yes, Peggy is right, Laura agreed. Let me, Peggy, and Sharon take turns. The people Laura suggested were the most suitable candidates right now. They didn't have specific responsibilities in Winterfell and were relatively free, making them ideal for this kind of work. Others like Eva, Will, Mark, and Jonah all had their own responsibilities. Leon, Ratchet, and Steve mostly stayed in their own worlds. As for Krauser, he'd only just arrived and hadn't even grasped the basics yet. That settled then, the brief meeting concluded. David would travel to Hearthland with Laura and Sharon tomorrow. As for Steve, it depended on whether he'd come before his departure. Barring any unforeseen circumstances, the item would be available in a few days. And because the public version has too many words, it is likely to be put on the shelves in reverse order. Those who follow the update, you are in luck. Cap. Chapter 130 Hearthland. After a good night of rest and refreshment, David rose early the next morning. While washing and eating breakfast, which Elias had brought to David's cabin, he briefly greeted the ceremonial officer and told him he might be out and about from time to time, so he told him not to worry. According to the rules of the Kingdom of Tiran, I must always be with a baron. The circumstances are special, so it's not convenient to take you with me. Elias had no choice but to accept the baron's orders. However, Elias was concerned when he mentioned that he wouldn't be taking his personal guard, Floyd and Gareth Stanton, with him on this trip. Don't worry, I have some special means, so there's no need to worry about my safety. After a few casual words, David donned his Lightbringer suit again, carrying his usual weapons, the Hammer of Judgment and the Light Hunter. When he left the cabin, Laura and Sharon had also changed into their gear, both women fully armed. Laura donned her silver-white armor, carrying a hunting bow and quiver. She also had 2 pistols strapped to her waist, loaded with powerful ammunition, likely crafted by Will. Sharon wore armor Will had crafted, infused with crystal or powder. She carried a shield on her back and a specially crafted knight's lance in her right hand, inlaid with relatively large chunks of crystal. Or are you going to fight someone? David asked before he could greet the 2 women. Steve arrived. You're just in time. After explaining the situation to Steve, the enthusiastic Captain America asked everyone to wait for him and left Wintertown. When he reappeared, Steve, who usually wore casual pants and a leather jacket, was now dressed in armor, with a round shield in his left hand and the Hammer of Redemption and a pistol slung from his waist. Are you okay? You might be staying in Azeroth for a while this time. Don't worry, I just got my vacation. Then let's go together. As they were talking, Fording arrived. Upon seeing his fully armed companions, he learned they had decided to head to Hearthland to help him. We won't be launching a counterattack for the next few days. Fording thanked them for their support and explained the situation. And if we do, you won't be charging with the soldiers. After all, you haven't received any training. We all understand that, Steve said. We're just trying to do what we can. Fording nodded to David and the others, then led them to Hearthland. Those who had decided to stay in Wintertown also came to chat with Fording and expressed their support. After Fording, David, and the others disappeared, Will and Mark exchanged a glance, their hearts aroused by an unprecedented desire to become stronger. Guess we can't be too complacent. Mark had originally thought that possessing some kind of mystical power would be a great thing, but if he truly didn't have the talent, he wouldn't force it. But now that he had acquired the knowledge of the shaman and taken a crucial first step, he had no reason to slack off. If he let such an opportunity slip through his fingers due to his own laziness, he'd regret it so much that he'd run to Mars and bury himself in a random hole, Not only would he be too ashamed to return to Wintertown, he'd even be too ashamed to return to Earth. As for Will, he was content with his current situation. He had a stable career, a growing fortune, and a blossoming relationship with Elizabeth. Recently, after helping Port Royal repel a band of erratic pirates with his own unique weapons, he earned the recognition of Elizabeth's father, Governor Weatherby Swan. With both his career and his romantic life so successful, had he lost the drive to strive further? He now diligently crafted and researched various crystal weapons, primarily as a job and also as a hobby. But now, he realized he wasn't working hard enough. If he continued like this, he might soon lose his unique position in Wintertown. Will was the only blacksmith in Wintertown who mastered the crafting and development of crystal weapons, and his position in the town was secure. With everyone else mastering various magical powers, could a mere ordinary person like me still craft weapons that met David and the others' requirements? Maybe. I should learn alchemy from that alchemist named Pierre Newton. Will had learned about alchemy when David had come to the blacksmith's shop a few days ago to learn about blacksmithing. This factor might have contributed to Will's sense of shattered status. It could even be said that learning alchemy wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision. The thought had been in his mind since then, and today, he had solidified it. Besides Will and Mark, Clauser, who had always wanted to become stronger, chatted with Leon, who hadn't left and stayed overnight in Wintertown. He no longer concealed his desire for greater power from Leon, his benefactor, especially in Wintertown. If he wanted to better repay his medical bills, he needed to become even stronger. Perhaps I could ask Thathiva if there were any powers suitable for us to learn. Leon pointed at himself. Was there anything else he could do here? Of course. And learning these amazing powers will also make you better able to deal with those bio-infectious diseases, right? Crawford didn't consider Leon an outsider. After all, Leon was the one who truly earned the right to come to Wintertown. Besides, what happens here from now on really has nothing to do with you. You have a point, but can I learn those amazing things? Leon had already heard the general situation from Peggy. Magicians, druids, shamans, paladins, and the like? It sounds like they have nothing to do with ordinary people like me. I'm afraid you're the only one who thinks you're ordinary, Crawford complained to Leon. He prepared to go to Eva for some relevant information. He wanted to study the characteristics of these powers and determine which one would be most suitable for him. Just as Wintertown suddenly began to experience a surge of power, David and the others followed Fording to the world of Azeroth, Hearthglen, located in the northern kingdom of Lordaeron. Is this Azeroth? David and the others continued to Fording's office. Upon arriving, David's first glance was at Steve. What's wrong? Are you feeling anything special? Special? Steve asked, his face etched with doubt. Nothing special. David observed Steve carefully for a moment, his face in disbelief. He indeed saw nothing unusual happening from Steve. Oh, I seem to sense something. Steve closed his eyes and sensed it for a moment, then, like Mark, he heard the earth swaying. This land is suffering, it's begging for my help. I seem to have suddenly learned a lot about shamanism. David thought this was normal, and he could already view it with a normal mind. What the hell? Are the elemental spirits discriminating against me? Ignoring Steve, David looked at Sharon nearby, only to find her standing there, surveying her surroundings. Nothing unusual was happening to her. Sharon, what's wrong? The power you had trouble communicating and mobilizing in Wintertown should be easier here. David was suggesting that if Sharon could mobilize arcane energy here, if she was truly interested in it, this would be a great opportunity. But to David's surprise, Sharon revealed that she had already mastered some kind of power. Huh? David assumed Sharon had chosen the Holy Light. After all, as the second Captain America, he must have a strong affinity for it. You chose the Holy Light. No, I chose arcane energy. You said it can't be mobilized. Oh, you asked Pierre for help. David immediately understood how Sharon had managed it. Yes, didn't Pierre say alchemists are good at these things? Back in the capital, Sharon had learned from Pierre Newton how to draw arcane energy from the continent of Brunia. After a period of hard work, she had accumulated a considerable amount of arcane energy within her body. So, you're planning to become a mage? Who says you have to be a mage to wield arcane energy? Sharon wasn't planning to become a mage. She chose arcane energy because it was highly adaptable and versatile. It wouldn't affect her original fighting style, but would add more variety to her combat. Just when David wanted to ask more about Sharon's situation, someone knocked on the office door and asked, "Father, Tiran, "Come in." As a tall, armored, brown-haired knight walked in, Fordring introduced David and the others. "This is my son, Tiran Fordring." At the same time, he introduced David and the others to Tiran, who was full of doubts. "They are friends I met outside. After learning about the situation in Hearthglen, they came here to help." Hearing that they were people who came here specifically to help, Tiran expressed his sincere gratitude and welcome to them. "Welcome to Hearthglen. I'm sorry that I can't take you to appreciate the beautiful scenery of Hearthglen. When the Scourge retreats, I will personally lead you to see the beautiful scenery here." After saying these words, Tiran immediately turned his head to look at his father and explained why he came to him suddenly. "Father, Jaina Proudmoore is here." Chapter 131 The Elites of Hearthglen. "Jaina? What's she doing here?" David wasn't the only one puzzled. Even Fordring was confused as to why this Dalaran mage from Kultiras would come to Hearthglen. Tilan, unaware that his father was pondering the implications of this change for their side, assumed Tiran Fordring was questioning him, so he answered honestly, "Mage Jaina Proudmoore heard we were fighting the Scourge in Hearthglen, so she's here on behalf of Dalaran to investigate." "Is that so?" Tiran Fordring turned and exchanged a glance with David. Both of them sensed something more complicated. "It just so happens that I'm gathering everyone to discuss something. I'd like to invite Mage Proudmoore along." "Yes, Father." Tilan didn't need to ask who would be invited. He was well aware of the current situation in Hearthglen. If his father planned any military deployment or action, he would have to notify those who were indispensable. Besides that, there was Jaina Proudmoore, the Dalaran representative who had just arrived in Hearthglen. After Tiran left, Fordring looked at David and said, "Things are starting to change. It was bound to happen sooner or later." According to the original storyline, Jaina and Arthas initially investigated the plague in Lordaeron, and the first city they visited was actually Hearthglen. In other words, in the original storyline, Hearthglen fell to the Scourge before Strathallam. Later, Tiran Fordring joined forces with the remaining Knights of the Silver Hand to recapture Hearthglen from the undead and use it as a base for the Scarlet Crusade. Now, thanks to Fordring's maneuvers, Hearthglen has escaped destruction. Jaina and Arthas merely passed through Hearthglen during their investigation, and finding no outbreak of plague, they moved on. Subsequent events remained largely unchanged from the original storyline, with a plague breaking out in Strathallam, Arthas ordering a massacre, Uther's dismissal, and Jaina's disappointed departure. According to the original story, Jaina would return to the mage city of Dalaran, receive guidance from a prophet, lead some of Lordaeron's survivors, and embark on a Kultiran warship to Kalimdor, where she would face her defining battle as a hero, the Battle of Mount Higil. In other words, Jaina would not have come to Hearthglen after returning to Dalaran. Furthermore, Fordring and David were most concerned about the prophet, while others didn't know. They knew that this so-called prophet was actually Medivh, the previous guardian of Azeroth. Was Jaina's sudden trip to Hearthglen guided by this prophet? What did the prophet think of Fordring's actions? "I can't think of an answer here. Let's go meet Miss Proudmoore." Fordring waved his hand, motioning David and the others to follow him. "By the way, let me introduce you to my colleagues in Hearthglen." Following Fordring out of his office, they soon arrived at a large conference room. As they traversed the corridors, they were able to see the interior of the Lower Azeroth fortress. Seeing the dim, dark surroundings, David suddenly realized that his decision not to choose a castle as his residence was a wise one. In terms of comfort, modern architecture is definitely better. Laura agreed with the design. She didn't want to live in a large, gloomy castle. Arriving at the conference room, several armored knights were already waiting, and Fordring immediately introduced them. "This is Alexandros Magraine, and this is Alfred Abendis." David was first introduced to the two towering knights in heavy armor. Hearing their names, David understood why they were introduced first. The current composition of the Knights of the Silver Hand in Hearthglen is quite complex. There are those who originally stationed in Hearthglen and served under Tiran Fordring, and these are Fordring's former subordinates, making them the easiest for Tiran Fordring to mobilize and command. Some of these troops came from the deserted regions of Eastweald, primarily those originally led by Uther. Having lost their commander, they had come to Hearthglen and were willing to follow the orders of Fordring, making their deployment relatively straightforward. Another group arrived in Hearthglen under the leadership of other commanders of the Knights of the Silver Hand, including knights led by Alexandros Magraine and Alfred Abendis. This is the commander from Ironforge, Birim Goldenhammer. The greatest aid to Fordring's defense of Hearthglen came not from Alfred Abendis and Alexandros Magraine, but from the dwarves of Ironforge. Not only did they provide a large number of artillery pieces, but the dwarves also sent elite gunners and musketeers to directly participate in Hearthglen's defense. The commander of these dwarven forces was the dwarven commander before David. As the introductions were being made, more people began to arrive at a meeting room, and Fordring introduced them to David one by one. They included the priest Iselene, who taught Tiran the ways of the light while Tyrion Fordring was away from Hearthglen, Mograine's chief advisor, Fairbanks, Alexandros Mograine's sons, Renaer Mograine, and Darian Mograine, Bridget Abitus, daughter of Alfred Abitus. Then there was Jaina Proudmoore, leader of Cultiris, daughter of Alliance Admiral Dylan Proudmoore, and a Kirin mage from Dalaran, who had suddenly arrived in Hearthglen. Coincidentally, Kalia Menethil, the last surviving member of Lordaeron's royal family, also arrived. "This is Baron David Glamorgan. He learned of my situation and has come to help." Introducing David, Fordring didn't explain his background, only emphasizing that David's assistance stemmed from a personal connection. While it wasn't clear where David came from, everyone present welcomed his willingness to help under these circumstances. Kalia Menethil even expressed her gratitude to David on behalf of the Kingdom of Lordaeron. "Your Highness, there's no need to be so polite. The Scourge is the mortal enemy of all living beings. I simply did what a living being is supposed to do." David's response warmed everyone present. They felt that while Baron Glamorgan wasn't a member of the Knights of the Silver Hand, his performance showed him to be a distinguished follower of the Holy Light. After this small talk, Fordring began discussing the real business, the plan to break out of Hearthglen and launch a counterattack against the Scourge. To David's surprise, every commander present agreed. In the eyes of these paladins, after stabilizing Hearthglen's defenses and resisting the Scourge's assault, launching a counterattack was a natural progression. They had no intention of remaining in Hearthglen, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Alfred Abitus and Alexandros Mograine even declared their determination to confront Arthas and slay the Kingslayer, who had betrayed the Kingdom of Lordaeron and its people, to make him pay for his actions. David watched in amazement, acutely aware of how out of place he felt among these paladins. It seemed his inability to become a paladin wasn't simply due to his lack of physical strength. As Fordring and the commanders discussed the battle plan, David didn't interrupt, simply listening quietly. Even when asked for his opinion, he humbly stated that he wasn't well versed in combat and would simply follow their instructions. As Fordring, Mograine, Abendis, and Barim Goldenhammer began discussing the details, David withdrew. Then, he felt a gentle kick on his heel. He turned to see Laura, who signaled him to look at Jaina nearby. "That mermaid has been observing you for a while now, perhaps she's suspicious of my origins." David glanced at Jaina, their eyes meeting. Seeing this, Jaina no longer hid in the shadows, but approached openly. The four commanders were still discussing the details, particularly the route they should take when fighting back from Hearthglen and clearing out the Scourge. How should they determine Arthas's current location? Should they first eliminate the surrounding Scourge and then encircle Arthas? Or should they attack Arthas in one fell swoop and eliminate the culprit first? Then, they should turn around and clear out the undead in the kingdom. It took a while for them to reach a consensus. Meanwhile, Bridget Abendis was discussing similar issues with Teelan Fordring and Mograine's two sons, each expressing their own opinions in a small circle. David and his group had gathered in another small circle. Jaina, standing alone, approached David. "Hello, I'm Jaina Proudmoore, a mage. Nice to meet you, Mage Proudmoore." The woman didn't mention the daughter of the Cultiran leader, only her own mage status, so David addressed her as a mage. "Just call me Jaina." Jaina looked at David curiously. "Where is Baron Glamorgan from?" "I'm from Wintertown." David saw Jaina frowning, as if wondering where Wintertown was, and added, "It's a very remote town. It's normal that you haven't heard of it." Jaina nodded and then chatted with David. At this moment, out of sight of everyone, a blonde dwarf was frantically pounding on an invisible wall, shouting, "Let me in." Chapter 132 Target Arthas. David and Jaina chatted casually for a moment. David would gloss over any underlying issues, or simply keep silent if they couldn't be addressed, maintaining a superficial attitude of not saying anything. Since Lee and Jaina weren't familiar with each other, maintaining a superficial politeness was sufficient. The two chatted for a while. Fordring had already laid out the general plan for the counterattack with several commanders. Jaina knew only that Baron David Glamorgan was from a city called Wintertown, and that the people around him were Lara Croft, Steve Rogers, and Sharon Rogers. Beyond that, she hadn't learned anything else, which filled Jaina with deep suspicion. At that moment, Fording called everyone together around the conference table. A complete map of the East Wild region, decorated with elaborate military plaques, laid out the current enemy and friendly situation at a glance. We've decided to launch an offensive against the undead outside Hearthglen in 3 days, clearing the entire northern part of this region. As Fording's finger traced the area, everyone understood the objective of the counterattack. Clear the entire area north of Endorhel. Bridget Tabidis glanced at Endorhel. Are you ignoring Endorhel? Our goal is to focus all our forces on eliminating Arthas first. As the Lord of Hearthglen and the current commander-in-chief of our remaining Lordaeron forces, Fordring began to explain the core concept of this operation to everyone. Only by eliminating Arthas can the undead be completely eradicated. Otherwise, we will only be endlessly entangled with these undead. Hearing this, everyone understood Tyrion Fordring's meaning. Without destroying Arthas, killing more undead would be meaningless. As long as Arthas was dead, the scourge would not disappear. Arthas could endlessly create more undead creatures. He didn't even need to do such a thing deliberately. The most terrifying thing about the scourge was its pollution of the entire area. Wherever the scourge passed, it contaminated the surrounding environment, rendering it uninhabitable without requiring any deliberate destruction. This pollution profoundly affected all living things. Even healthy individuals, if succumbed to the forces of death, could become undead. Crops grown on contaminated land, consumed by healthy individuals, would also become infected, transforming them into even more undead. This terrifying power of contamination was a key reason Fording proposed his plan. If they continued to delay, even if they could defeat the scourge, the entire East Wildard would be completely destroyed. While the survivors might have escaped the undead plague, they would still have lost their homes. Destroy the scourge while the contamination is still mild. Fording knew that the scourge's plague had many sources, but Arthas was the most dangerous. Without eliminating him, they would be unable to turn their attention to the other sources of contamination. So, the most important thing now is to find out where Arthas is. David had been watching and listening the entire time, and only now did he speak. Have you investigated Arthas's current location? The commanders were silent. Initially, they concentrated their forces on defending Hearthglen. The Griffin riders and helicopters were primarily responsible for positioning and observation of the artillery batteries, and they didn't fly too far. After launching the counterattack, we'll begin reconnaissance of the surrounding area. Fording outlined the subsequent plan. If Arthas is already waiting somewhere for us to emerge, then this effort wouldn't be necessary. David and Fording exchanged glances, and they immediately struck a chord. Fording still believed that Arthas had gone to attack Quel'Therlas, so his plan for this counterattack was bold, not even considering the movement of the heavy artillery batteries. In other words, the main force of the upcoming counterattack would be the Paladins of the Silver Hand. Once a safe area was established, the heavy artillery batteries would be moved to the newly conquered area to help defend it. He believed that Arthas had no ambush, and that the Paladins of the Silver Hand were more than capable of handling a simple scourge. Hearthglen has enough griffins, right? Yes, Hearthglen had griffin riders, but their numbers were small, so they didn't dare fly far out easily, fearing they wouldn't be able to return. After all, the scourge possessed a large number of flying troops. I can help with that. David felt that it wouldn't be difficult for him to ride a griffin eastward to locate Arthas. Locating Arthas's location sooner would make it easier for Fordring to plan follow-up operations. They could also ally with the High Elves of Quel'Therlas to attack Arthas and his scourge from both sides. I can help with contacting Quel'Therlas. Jaina, who had also been largely absent from the war meeting, suddenly said. I believe the Elves of Quel'Therlas will not refuse this proposal. The scourge threatened the entire world's living beings, and the Elves of Quel'Therlas were also living beings. Their life form meant they couldn't refuse an alliance with the Kingdom of Lordaeron. Whatever conflicts had previously flared between the two sides could be put aside for now. Given the close relationship between Dalaran and the Elves of Quel'Therlas, using Jaina as the go-between was indeed a good choice. It's decided. Fording quickly issued a series of orders, including that the Knights of the Silver Hand prepare for the next attack, and that the Dwarven heavy artillery and riflemen remain on standby pending further deployment. Then, as Lord of Hearthglen, acting Commander-in-Chief of the Knights of the Silver Hand, and temporary Commander-in-Chief of the Kingdom of Lordaeron's army, he would sign an alliance with Quel'Therlas. This alliance letter would need to be approved by Kalia Menethil, the last remaining member of the royal family, and an additional letter would be required. All of this would take time to prepare, and to arrange suitable griffins for David and Jaina. Get me one too, Steve said, deciding to join David on this reconnaissance. This kind of work is what I excel at, Fording nodded. He had confidence in David's abilities, and he could always return to Winterfell if he encountered danger he couldn't handle. So when David suggested riding his griffin to scout Arthas's location, Fordring wasn't the least bit concerned for his companion's safety. Steve's situation was similar, except for Jaina. You can use teleport to Quel'Thalas, right? If Quel'Thalas is truly under attack by Arthas, then teleporting into Silver Moon City shouldn't be possible at this point. Quel'Thalas's perimeter is protected by powerful defensive magic. Even with the defenses at full strength during an attack, even their prince, Keylthas, would be able to teleport back to Silver Moon City, let alone an outsider like Jaina. Is that so? Fordring gave his orders, then gave David and Jaina a few more instructions before handing them over to Birham Goldenhammer. The few remaining griffin riders in Hearthglen were dwarves, obeying the dwarven commander. After receiving Fordring's orders, Birham led David and the others out of Hearthglen Fortress and outside. This was David and the others' first real glimpse of Hearthglen, and everyone was gazing around with curiosity. But what they saw wasn't a pastoral farm, but rows of artillery emplacements and patrolling dwarven musketeers, Garen rifles strapped to their backs. Noticing David and the others observing the dwarves, Birham immediately introduced the dwarves' latest development, a dwarven modified version of the Garand rifle, manufactured in Ironforge. These rifles are excellent. Almost every dwarf wants one now, but all the ones currently manufactured have been sent to Hearthglen. The conversation then turned to artillery, from the currently most numerous 105mm howitzers to the 10 155mm heavy guns currently serving as the ultimate weapon. Finally, Birham proudly announced that Ironforge, building on their accumulated experience, was developing a new, 200mm caliber, super weapon, dubbed the Lordaeron Cannon. David, sensing that the dwarves of Ironforge had taken a strange path, didn't know how to react to this change. He could only smile in amazement, earning a ribbon from Steve beside him. Your smile is too perfunctory. It wasn't until they arrived at the Griffin Knights camp and met their commander, Griffin Surdon, that Birham finally paused in his introduction to the muskets and artillery. This is Griffin Surdon, the commander of the Griffin Knights. Under his guidance, you can select an obedient griffin to complete your mission. After thanking Birham Goldenhammer and explaining their purpose, Griffin Surdon immediately stated that the task was easy, but to ensure nothing went wrong, he would personally ride the griffin alongside them, ensuring these newbies could successfully locate their target. Just ride the griffins and be careful not to fall off. I'll handle all the flying. This way, David, Steve, and Jaina didn't have to teach them how to fly. After Fording and Princess Kalia finished writing the letter, the three of them could immediately set out to find Arthas and head for Quel'Thalas. Under the guidance of Grease Surdon, the griffins flew smoothly and soon found Arthas Menethil, who was commanding the Scourge's attack on the High Elven Kingdom, on the outskirts of Quel'Thalas. The former Prince of Lordaeron was fiercely attacking an Elven Ranger General. Chapter 133 The Incarnation of Holy Light. Sylvanus looked in despair at the towering, white-haired knight leaping from his horse before her. After the relentless, intense fighting, her physical strength was exhausted, her magicka drained, and not a single arrow remained in her quiver. All she had left was her battered hunting bow. Is this the end? No, this is only the beginning. Arthas raised Frostmourne and aimed it at Sylvanus. He admired the Ranger General of Silver Moon City. She would be a powerful addition to the Scourge, helping him fulfill the Lich King's orders. Just as Arthas was about to plunge Frostmourne into the Ranger General, a force he once knew so well, yet now loathed, crashed down upon him. The overwhelming holy light forced him to retreat, raising Frostmourne in defense. Clang! A deafening roar erupted, followed by a massive explosion of holy light power radiating from Frostmourne, held in Arthas's grasp. The powerful impact forced Arthas to retreat further, retreating several meters before he regained his balance and gained a clearer view of his attacker. Who are you? Arthas, staring at the young human suddenly appearing before him, realized he didn't recognize him at all. The pink one-handed hammer, which he had just parried with Frostmourne, flew back into the young human's grasp under the influence of holy light. From that brief moment of mid-air combat, Arthas realized he was facing a formidable foe. This battle would likely be no easier than the one with Uther. He gripped Frostmourne even tighter, the runes on the blade emitting a faint blue glow. Arthas didn't wait for a response, but he didn't care. No matter who you are, anyone who stands in my way will only have one end. David, having used the Hammer of the Avenger to knock Arthas away and save Ranger General Sylvanus, was now sizing up the Death Knight before him. Indeed, Arthas was merely a Death Knight serving the Lich King, not yet the Lich King, the man slaughtered and slaughtered by countless players. Arthas still maintained his human form, a tall, strong, and handsome man. However, as a Death Knight, he exuded a cold, deathly aura that made him uneasy. As he was sizing up the former Prince of Lordaeron, a man so popular in his previous life, he suddenly overheard his words and lashed out, "To think you, the Prince of Lordaeron, first in line to the throne, the future King of Lordaeron, would become a pawn of the Burning Legion, and a pawn of the Burning Legion." Before David could finish his words, Arthas charged forward, Frostmourne in hand, his greatsword cleaving directly at David's head. Judging from Arthas's expression, he seemed unaffected. However, his actions revealed the profound impact David's casual words had on the incredibly proud prince. Otherwise, given his previous behavior, his first choice when encountering a powerful warrior would be to transform them into undead creatures to enhance the Scourge's combat power. Now, by attacking their heads, he clearly ruled out that option. "Hey, are you impatient?" A layer of holy light shone from David's body. Although it lasted only 2 seconds before being shattered by Frostmourne's full force, Arthas did not continue his attack. Instead, he decisively dodged backward, perfectly avoiding a pillar of fire that fell from the sky. Holy fire? Priest, in theory, followers of the holy light wield the power of the holy light. For example, paladins were originally converted from clerics. However, after so many years of development, many paladins are no longer just career changers, they are basically trained and taught as paladins from the beginning. For example, Arthas initially trained in various combat techniques, then, after his baptism by the holy light, focused on becoming a paladin. He had only a passing acquaintance with the sacred fire, a skill typically studied by clerics. Seeing the man in armor and wielding a warhammer, he'd mistakenly thought he was a young paladin. Could he actually be a cleric? Arthas had no time to analyze the situation. He'd barely dodged David's holy fire, barely stabilizing himself, when he felt something fly toward him from the side. Without even turning to look, he swung Frostmourne diagonally behind him. Another crisp sound echoed, and Arthas turned to see a red and blue round shield he'd smashed into the air. The danger wasn't over yet. The shield had returned to the hands of a knight, who, wielding a similarly unusual warhammer to the young man's, charged at him. Flying knee, shield bash, 40, 40, 40, shield bash. Although this series of combos did not cause any damage to Arthas, it did make him flustered for a moment. What's more, the priest next to him would release punishment attacks to attack him from time to time, making it impossible for him to deal with the opponent in front of him well. "You are." Sylvanas knelt on one knee. She no longer had the strength to stand. She could only look up at the stranger beside her. "Are you a priest of Lordaeron?" "I'm not a priest of Lordaeron, but I have come to Quel'Thalas on behalf of Lordaeron." David glanced at Sylvanas Windrunner, who was half kneeling beside her. "My name is David." "Thank you, David." Sylvanas forced herself to stand. Her condition was visibly worse, but she still gripped her bow tightly, searching the ground for a suitable arrow. "Forgive me for not being able to express my gratitude more clearly. I need to go support my men." David looked up. The area was ablaze with battle, and Sylvanas, the ranger general, was not the only one exhausted and out of ammunition and food. Many high elves of Quel'Thalas lay on the ground. Even if the Scourge's undead didn't come to finish them off, they were powerless against the onslaught of death and would soon be transformed into undead. "Leave it to me, leave it to you." Sylvanas glanced in surprise at the young man beside her, David. He looked very young, perhaps only in his 20s. Although Sylvanas had already known David's strength from his previous performance, what could he do in the face of such a complete defeat? Even as Sylvanas pondered this, David raised his hand high into the sky. Within his raised palm, a ball of holy light, as brilliant as the sun, condensed. This highly concentrated holy light shot straight into the sky, as if creating a passage between David and the heavens. As the holy light in David's hand shone even brighter, it enveloped him entirely, transforming him into a giant light bulb. The powerful airflow nearly knocked Sylvanas, who was standing nearby in a state of severe weakness, to the ground. But she could no longer care about her own situation. Sylvanas watched in shock as the beam of light between David and the sky gradually thickened, and the entire sky turned golden, as if a holy light rained down, filling the entire battlefield with a rich holy power. The elves, exhausted and in dire condition, practically awaiting death. found themselves rapidly recovering. The Holy Light priests accompanying the ranger troops discovered that the Holy Light within them was regenerating at an astonishing rate, their fighting power restored. Furthermore, because Holy Light naturally restrains undead creatures, the Scourge soldiers frantically attacking the elves appeared to be in immense pain under the Holy Light's illumination. Some weaker ghouls were even purified by the Holy Light that filled the heavens and earth. Even a powerful Death Knight like Arthas felt uncomfortably vulnerable in this environment suffused with Holy Light. Opposite him, Steve, like a fish back in water, appeared even more formidable. The hammer of redemption in his hand had transformed into a gigantic light bulb, each swing carrying the potent force of Holy Light, its power increasing from 40 to 80. What irritated Arthas most was the elusive shield. This was the first time he had encountered a paladin capable of using the Avenger's shield to such an extent, and for a moment, he was at a loss as to how to deal with it. However, what truly intimidated Arthas wasn't the paladin before him, but the priest nearby. Taking a break from the battle, Arthas glanced at the young priest nearby. Was the Holy Light, so powerful that it terrified him, truly a force that humans could master? Similar questions arose in Sylvanas's heart. She was shocked by the strength of this young stranger. In her many years, she had never seen or even heard of anyone possessing such terrifying Holy Light power. In a trance, she suspected that the person before her was not an emissary from Lordaeron at all, but the embodiment of the Holy Light. Even Sylvanas, who did not believe in the Holy Light, would have such thoughts. Liadrin, a follower of the Holy Light, had tears in her eyes. She looked at the miracle not far away and whispered softly, "Holy Light, you have not abandoned us." At this moment, David, who had created such an exaggerated scene, closed his eyes, feeling the seemingly endless power of the Holy Light, his mind full of questions. When did I become so strong? Chapter 134 VIPs from Silver Moon City. David wasn't sure what was happening, but he felt exhilarated. He had cast such a powerful Holy Light spell, and instead of depleting the Holy Light within him, it had become even more powerful and abundant. If his mind hadn't been clear, he would have been obsessed with a state, unwilling to wake up, allowing the Holy Light within him to grow even more powerful. He opened his eyes and stopped the spell. The strange scene on the battlefield didn't change even after David stopped. The sky and earth were still filled with a vast expanse of Holy Light. Enchanted by the Holy Light, the High Elves of Quel'Thalas regained some of their fighting strength. While the arrows and arcane spells they had expended could not be replenished, their physical health was now completely restored. Both the damage they had sustained and their physical strength were restored to peak levels by the overwhelming Holy Light. Furthermore, the Scourge's undead creatures were greatly affected by the Holy Light, their combat effectiveness dropping several notches. These changes gradually stabilized Quel'Thalas's already crumbling defenses. Noticing this change, Arthas realized that the attack had failed. After exerting all his might to drive back the annoying paladin, Arthas glanced coldly at David, who was not far away, and then at Jaina, who had just dismounted from her griffin. He then mounted the undead steed that had come beside him and swiftly unleashed a high, thick wall of ice, blocking all pursuers, including Steve, before quickly withdrawing from the battlefield. As Arthas retreated, the Scourge gradually left the area awash with Holy Light energy, though a large number of ghouls and undead soldiers were still purified by the Holy Light, bidding farewell to this world forever. "That's Arthas," Steve sighed helplessly, looking at the solid, cold ice wall that exuded the aura of death. "He's really strong. I could barely damage him." "No, you did, but he hid it well." Although Steve had gained the powerful power of the Holy Light, he was still unfamiliar with some extraordinary situations and habitually relied on his eyes to observe and judge. In fact, facing Steve, who was highly recognized by the Holy Light and vaguely supported by Elune, Arthas found it difficult to fight. After David unleashed a torrent of Holy Light, creating a realm of Holy Light, Arthas's condition worsened. It felt as if a living being were immersed in concentrated acid. Even without any other attacks, his body was ravaged, and the death force within him was constantly being melted away by the Holy Light. This was the fundamental reason why Arthas decisively retreated, since the Scourge had swept across Lordaeron. This was the first time Arthas had voluntarily retreated. As the two men spoke, the surviving High Elf warriors on the battlefield had gathered. These High Elves of Quel'Thalas were exceptionally proud and looked down upon ordinary humans. But those they looked down upon definitely did not include the two powerful Holy Light users before them. Whether it was the Paladin who could challenge Arthas's powerful Death Knight in single combat, or the young priest who cast a holy light spell that was like a miracle. Moreover, these two were the saviors of all the high elves present. Priests like Liandrin expressed their gratitude and openly showed their respect for the two men. Of course, Steve sensed that most of the elven priests' respect was directed toward David. The Scourge is the enemy of all living beings. Saving our comrades is our duty, David observed the high elves, who, though their strength had returned but who still looked utterly devastated, said, "We will not sit idly by and watch our comrades die at the hands of the Scourge." Initially, he had simply come to locate Arthas. Delivering a message to Quel'Thalas and facilitating a reunion between Lordaeron and Quel'Thalas were Jaina's tasks. He had simply come to observe the proceedings. He had never imagined that he and his companions would arrive just as Arthas was about to stab Sylvanus. According to David's memory, Sylvanus's death marked the complete collapse of Quel'Thalas's defenses. The Scourge then destroyed Silver Moon City, then landed on the Isle of Quel'Danas and slew the Quel'Thalas king, an Asterian Sunstrider. Finally, they used the island's sunwill to resurrect Kel'Thuzad and transform him into a lich, completing the first half of the mission entrusted to him by the Lich King. In other words, unless David decided to return directly to Hearthglen on his griffin, he would have to stop Arthas to prevent the destruction of Quel'Thalas, which led to the events that had just unfolded. No matter what, you saved Quel'Thalas and countless high elves. Sylvanus looked around. As the highest-ranking person present, she needed to express her gratitude to David and Steve on behalf of Quel'Thalas. You will be Quel'Thalas's eternal friends. As for negotiating an alliance on behalf of the Kingdom of Lordaeron, that was practically out of the question. Even without consulting King and Asterian Sunstrider, Sylvanus could give a positive answer. The Scourge had already reached the gates of Silver Moon City, and they were merely being driven back by David's use of holy light. The Death Knight Arthas, now fallen into the form of undead, could launch another attack on Quel'Thalas at any moment. Quel'Thalas needed allies and external aid. Otherwise, Sylvanus lacked the confidence to defend her nation. After all, the Scourge was too formidable. It wasn't just Arthas's immense strength, there was also the shock of grappling with an enemy with all your might, only to find your comrade standing shoulder to shoulder one moment and wielding a blade the next, facing you. At the same time, swinging a sword at a once close comrade was equally painful and torturous. Sylvanus glanced around, and saw many familiar faces missing from the ranks. She knew they had either become undead, temporarily departed with Arthas, or had departed forever under the spell of the powerful priest named David. Perhaps the latter was a relief, both for them and for herself. Leaving some elven rangers to clean up the battlefield and establish defensive positions, Sylvanus led David, Steve, and Jaina toward the palace of Silver Moon City. Glez Certain had returned to Hearthglen on his griffin to report on the situation. Entering Silver Moon City, the high elven city, David gazed upon the familiar yet vaster and more magnificent city, and a strange emotion welled up in his heart. Before crossing over to the continent of Brunia, he was a blood elf, or high elf, in the classic server. Silver Moon City was a place he was incredibly familiar with, not to mention being the first major city he'd seen in person since arriving in Azeroth. What a shame, I missed Stormwind City. Following Sylvanus, David quickly arrived at the square in front of the palace. To his surprise, an Asterian Sunstrider, the current king of Quel'Thalas, was waiting for him there. "Thank you very much for your aid, sir. Quel'Thalas will be your eternal friend." Upon meeting, an Asterian Sunstrider expressed his goodwill to David. As the king of Quel'Thalas, known for his pragmatism and prioritizing the interests of Quel'Thalas, even without mentioning David's rescue, an Asterian's miraculous level of holy light alone showed considerable goodwill. Furthermore, if it weren't for David and Steve's intervention today, Silver Moon City might have already fallen. An Asterian, with white hair and a noticeably frail appearance, gently greeted Steve and Jaina. "I understand your purpose. I wholeheartedly agree that the Scourge is the greatest enemy of all living beings on Azeroth." With these words, an Asterian sealed the alliance's fate, not even glancing at the letter Jaina had handed him. After the king read the letter, an Asterian began to consider how to establish a comprehensive communication system with Tiran Forgery and Lordaeron. Of course, there was no need to bother David or Jaina with such matters. The old king had arranged the best possible treatment for them, cordially inviting them to stay in Silver Moon City for a few days, and had Sylvanus, who was temporarily staying there to recuperate, host them. "What should we do now?" Steve, bewilderedly persuaded to stay by the old king, glanced at David beside him. "Stay here, no problem. Since His Majesty has sincerely invited us to stay, let's stay a few more days." David spent a long time choosing among several fruits before finally picking an apple. Besides, the situation in Silver Moon City is really not good. If we leave, Arthas might be able to capture it in no time. Although Anasterion had asked Sylvanus to entertain their guests, as a ranger general, Sylvanus had her own priorities and couldn't stay by their side like a servant. So, for now, only David, Steve, and Gina were there. David took a bite of the apple, delighted by the sweet and delicious fruits of Silver Moon City. He glanced at Gina, who had become unusually silent since meeting Arthas, and finally shook his head, thinking that he could not rely on this daughter of the sea. Sorry, Gina was silent and a little uneasy, but she didn't ignore the situation around her. After taking a few deep breaths and adjusting her mentality, Gina apologized to David. "If I had joined in earlier, perhaps, don't blame yourself. Even if you had taken action, you wouldn't have been able to kill Arthas today." David paused and glanced out the window. "If the Prophet is willing to help, there's still a chance. It should be available on the shelves at noon today. The update has been released in advance, so hurry up and read it if you are following the update." Chapter 135, Guardian Medivh. When David mentioned the title Prophet, Gina froze for 2 seconds, her eyes wide as she regarded David, Baron of Glamorgan. In her mind, she assumed this young man of unknown origin was, like herself, someone guided by the Prophet, which was why he acted so decisively. Since Gina made no secret of her feelings, David immediately saw through her thoughts and dismissed her speculation with a gentle wave of his hand. "You're wrong. I'm not the hero chosen by the Prophet, am I? Great Prophet, or should I call you Guardian Medivh?" If David's denial of Gina's suspicion merely surprised the young mage, then his second half truly shocked her. The Prophet is Guardian Medivh, she didn't question it. From David's tone and gestures, she knew the mysterious Prophet was present. Following David's gaze, she saw someone else in the room. No one noticed how or when they entered. Steve was wary of the sudden appearance of the mysterious red-robed figure, his vigilance almost at full throttle. Because of his cautiousness, powerful holy light, water, earth, wind, and electricity elements responded almost simultaneously, with tiny silver-white dots of light swirling around Steve. "Don't be nervous, Steve, this person isn't an enemy." Before today, seeing Steve's special effects-filled look, David would have had a serious conversation with someone who couldn't get enough sleep. Now, there was no need to bother. Let that person get enough sleep. The mysterious red-robed figure, Medivh, the Guardian who, in the name of the Prophet, sought heroes to unite the forces of Azeroth and thwart the Burning Legion's plot, lifted his hood, revealing his previously hidden true form. "I apologize for meeting you this way. My circumstances are somewhat unique." Medivh, the Guardian of Azeroth, was one of the instigators of the Orc invasion. It's fair to say that the former Guardian is inextricably linked to the impending invasion of the Orcs and the Burning Legion, as well as the scourge currently ravaging the Eastern Kingdoms. His reputation in Azeroth has been tarnished, so even if Medivh has shaken off Sargeras' influence and truly wants to do good for the world, he can only do so in hiding. Medivh glanced at Steve. He was a little curious about this man recognized by the light, the elements, and Elune, but the well-informed Medivh simply saw him as a remarkable hero. David, on the other hand, was a figure he couldn't fully grasp, and this was the real reason for his decision to reveal himself. "Hello, I'm Medivh." "Hello, I'm David." David casually introduced Steve to Medivh. As for Gina, who was standing nearby, he probably didn't need to do the job. Medivh greeted David and Steve before addressing Gina, briefly explaining why he had concealed his identity and was guiding her under the name of the Prophet. He could see that once Gina learned of his identity, the young sorceress was wary and cautious. The arcane aura emanating from her was so palpable that even non-magical people could detect it, as if she would unleash a blizzard on him at the slightest disagreement. It wasn't until Medivh repeatedly reassured her that he had broken free from Sargeras' influence and was guiding her in the name of the Prophet, not out of some new plot to harm Azeroth, but out of a genuine desire to protect the world, that he finally understood. All this is to counter the impending return of the Burning Legion. After briefly explaining the Lich King's relationship with the Legion, Gina finally realized the magnitude of the crisis Azeroth was about to face. She began to seriously consider whether to believe Medivh's words and prepare for the coming Burning Legion, or continue to treat the former Guardian as a threat and fight him directly. Whether you choose to believe or not is not the most important thing right now, Medivh said after explaining to Jaina. He turned and sternly regarded David. If I'm not mistaken, you are not from this world. In fact, Medivh believed that this David was not human at all. I'm not from here, Medivh said calmly, but Jaina, beside him, was practically beside him. The mage from Dalaran began to wonder if she had been caught up in some vast conspiracy. And this alien, David Glamorgan, had confessed so readily. Was he going to kill him to silence him? Jaina couldn't be blamed for thinking this, nor could she be said to suffer from paranoia. After all, this world had been persecuted since its inception. Even humanity, in its brief history, had endured the invasion of orcs from Draenor. Therefore, as Earth's intelligent life inherently resisted aliens, feeling a constant sense of another outsider trying to persecute us, Medivh, having experienced many hardships, was much calmer than Jaina. Furthermore, he felt that David before him was not a member of the Burning Legion. May I ask why you came to Azeroth? To help a friend, Tyrion Fordring. Medivh already knew David was here to help Fordring fight the Scourge, but he doubted the truth of the reason. Yes, David, sensing that this conversation wouldn't end anytime soon, simply sat down at the table and selected a fruit from the fruit bowl. After being stripped of his lordship and paladinship, Tyrion has lived in my domain and has taught me the ways of the light. Oh? Is that so? Medivh also sat down. After watching David pick up a few grapes, he also took a few from the bowl. So you really came to Azeroth to help Tyrion Fordring? Indeed, aren't you worried that this action will bring powerful enemies to your domain? You mean the Burning Legion? Yes, we'll talk about it once Sargeras can find him. Medivh looked at David and realized that he seemed to truly believe that Sargeras couldn't find him. Medivh didn't understand why the other party felt so confident, but he didn't intend to press the issue, as that would suggest he had ulterior motives. Considering his own reputation, Medivh carefully chose his questions and words. Consequently, David didn't feel offended, and his conversation with the former guardian felt more like a casual chat between two strangers. They chatted for hours, initially discussing David's reasons for coming to Azeroth, then gradually moving on to all sorts of bizarre local customs and practices. As a celestial mage with the ability to travel through countless worlds, Medivh was well informed. David, a time traveler living in an information-rich world, also knew a wealth of information. The two exchanged information and knowledge, and their conversation became a perfect match. Jaina, standing nearby, had the strange feeling that this alien visitor named David was about to steal a corner of Sargeras. The conversation lasted well into the evening, and they even had dinner at the same table before concluding. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Medivh stood up, signaling his departure. He said only one final word to Jaina. Forget the instructions I gave you earlier, they no longer apply. Turning to bid farewell to David and Steve, Medivh transformed into a raven as they watched, then flew away through the open window. He didn't fly far, not even leaving Silver Moon City. He simply found a high spot with a good view and landed there, glancing around. To ordinary eyes, the place looked empty, but to Medivh, it looked different. He could clearly see a blonde dwarf, her face filled with frustration, kicking at a wall of nothingness. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break the invisible barrier. Give up. The blonde dwarf was startled by the sudden voice, then realized it was the former guardian in the form of a raven speaking to him. Can you help me in? I can help you in, but once you enter this world, you'll lose the all-important power of time. The crow didn't look at the dwarf, but instead looked in the direction it had just flown from. Then, even if you enter, it's meaningless. Why? How could this happen? The blonde dwarf was startled by Medivh's words. He had never expected such a thing. What exactly happened to this timeline? A strange force has isolated this timeline. Medivh withdrew his gaze and looked at the blonde dwarf. You and your people, don't worry about what's happening in this timeline and whether it will cause any terrible disaster. Whatever happens here will not affect other timelines. The blonde dwarf found Medivh's words unbelievable. She had never heard of a power capable of such a thing. But she truly had no solution to the current situation. Perhaps this was no longer something she could handle. She needed to return and discuss it with her people. Watching the blonde dwarf disappear, Medivh remained on the rooftop in his crow form, pondering the future of this world. Because of David's appearance, many things have changed. What he originally thought would happen may not happen anymore. This has also left Medivh in a state of confusion. Does he still need to guide outstanding heroes to fight against the Burning Legion? Can the Burning Legion still get in? It's available. I hope you will continue to support me. Today's third update is here. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136, Autobot Expedition. Although Medivh had left, the tension he had created remained. Jaina sat down in the chair Medivh had occupied and looked across at David. Baron Glamorgan, Master Proudmoore. David had expected this, so he remained calm. Ask directly if you have any questions. Are you really only here to help Tyrion Fordring fight the Scourge? Yes, David's answer was crisp and clear, without a single unnecessary word, which puzzled Jaina. Normally, when faced with something like this, one would try hard to explain and convince the other party, right? Why was David so calm? Master Proudmoore should have heard the details of the conversation with Medivh just now. David didn't want to repeat the same thing over and over again. If Jaina continued to ask the same question, it would only prove that she didn't believe his explanation at all. In this situation, any explanation was meaningless. It would simply be a waste of words. Jaina understood David's attitude. Realizing it was pointless to question him further, she said goodnight to David and Steve and returned to the room the elves had arranged for her to rest. After Jaina left, Steve, who had been silent all day, finally spoke. What should we do next? Continue to defend this city. David nodded. Currently, Silver Moon City's defenses weren't strong enough to withstand the Scourge's attack. Until Fordring's main force reached the Scourge's rear, it would be up to him and Steve to protect the city. I hope Tyrion can move quickly. If the Lordaeron forces in Hearthglen were quick enough, they could trap Arthas on the outskirts of Eversong Wood and eliminate the Lich King's most valuable subordinate. Without Arthas, the Lich King would be powerless. Without Arthas's constant presence, the Burning Legion's attempt to enter Azeroth would be difficult. After a good night's rest, Sylvanas found David shortly after waking up the next morning. Something? Yes, Sylvanas's face looked grim, evidently showing she hadn't rested well the previous night. Her normally tanned complexion now looked unusually pale. Silver Moon's defenses are even weaker than I anticipated, so, on behalf of Quel'Thalas, I come to request your assistance. Sylvanas had been busy for most of the night, taking only a brief nap before waking up early to report to King Anasterion Sunstrider on the current state of Silver Moon's defenses. His Majesty was well aware of Quel'Thalas's current military strength. After actual battles with the Scourge, the old king understood that even at its peak, Quel'Thalas would struggle to withstand the Scourge's frenzied assault. And now, after repeated and bitter battles, with even Ranger General Sylvanas Windrunner herself in dire condition, Silver Moon City was simply no match for Arthas and his Scourge. To hold Silver Moon City, besides hoping for Tyrion Fordring to quickly bring the army of Lordaeron to support them, the only hope was David, who remained in Silver Moon. Besides requesting David's help, the old king also wanted to ask Jaina Proudmoore to seek assistance from Dalaran. A letter expressing his willingness to form an alliance with Lordaeron and join forces against the Scourge had already been sent last night. As for Dalaran's request for help, he considered sending a mage to discuss the matter with Jaina. Anasterion was unaware that, after learning from Medivh's conversation with David the previous night that the Scourge was linked to the Burning Legion's plan to invade Azeroth, Jaina had already begun to contact her mentor, Antonidas. The crisis was no longer simply a matter of the Eastern Kingdoms, but a calamity for all of Azeroth. Defeating the Scourge and thwarting the Burning Legion's plot became the most important task. In other words, even if Anasterion didn't send for Jaina, she would still find ways to persuade Dalaran to join the war. For example, right now, Jaina was saying goodbye to David and Steve when she happened upon Sylvanas, who had come to David for help. Don't worry, I'll convince the Kirin Tor to join forces with Quel'Thalas and the Kingdom of Lordaeron to fight the Scourge. Thank you very much for your help. Sylvanas expressed her sincerest gratitude to everyone and every force willing to aid Quel'Thalas. With Jaina's words and David's promise to help the elves resist the Scourge, Sylvanas could finally breathe a sigh of relief. You're stretched too thin. You need some rest, David observed, clad in turquoise light armor, curious about the Ranger General who would become Warchief of the Horde. He was familiar with Sylvanas in more of an undead form, a rare sight, with few fan art available. You can't fight the Scourge in this state. I'll rest later. Sylvanas knew the importance of rest, but right now, she had no time for it. After confirming David's support for the defense, Sylvanus and David chatted for a few more minutes before hurriedly checking on the ranger troops. Before leaving, Sylvanus introduced David to a female high elf priestess. This is Liandrin, a priestess of the Holy Light. If you and Steve would like to visit Silver Moon City, Liandrin can serve as your guide. David nodded, watched Sylvanus hurriedly depart, and then asked Liandrin to take him and Steve on a tour of the High Elven City. Silver Moon City was enormous, far larger than he had ever seen in the game, and it simply wouldn't be possible to explore in a single day. So David limited himself to the area around the palace and, with Liandrin's introduction, sampled some of Quel'Thas's specialties. Throughout the tour, David noticed Liandrin's extraordinary respect for him, which gave him a unique feeling. Liandrin would become the future Earl of Quel'Thas, leader of the Blood Knights, and the first High Elf to become a Paladin through the practice of drawing holy light. Of course, Liandrin was also the first true Paladin of Quel'Thas. Liandrin and the Blood Knights she led subsequently ceased relying on thieving methods to obtain the holy light and became true Paladins. Actually, you don't have to be so respectful to me. After a day of contact, David felt a strange feeling. If it were simply politeness, he wouldn't have found it strange. But Liandrin's attitude was practically as if she wanted to worship him. From the way she treated Steve, it was clear that this wasn't some special high elf etiquette, but simply that this elven priest was giving her special treatment. I'm sorry if you felt uncomfortable. Liandrin seemed flustered, and the uninformed might have thought David was bullying her. Faced with this situation, David didn't know what to do. He already had several subordinates in Winterfell, and they didn't act so flamboyantly towards him. Speaking of which, why did this future Blood Knight leader behave like this towards me? David only got some answer from Steve when he returned to his quarters that evening. That elven priest mistook you for the light spokesperson in Azeroth. Me? A spokesperson for the light? David pointed at himself, and only when Steve nodded firmly did he confirm his understanding was correct. Why do I give people that impression? Generally speaking, isn't it Steve Rogers who's often considered the spokesperson for the light? In Azeroth, that title seems more appropriate for Alonsis Feol, who, even in undead form, remains blessed by the light. Because of the spell you used yesterday, what was it called? It doesn't have a name, it's simply a widespread release of holy light. David suddenly realized that his performance yesterday was excessive. But Sylvanus was closer, so why didn't she react in the same way? Was it because Sylvanus didn't believe in the light? Just as David was pondering this, Sylvanus approached him again, holding a letter from Hearthland, specifically for David. Quel'Thas and the Kingdom of Lordaeron have officially forged an alliance to jointly fight the Scourge. Quel'Thas was originally a member of the alliance, but an Asterian withdrew it at the end of the Second War, necessitating a renewed alliance. In the original history, an Asterian's decision set in motion a series of subsequent events, culminating in Quel'Thas's ultimate allegiance to the Burning Legion. But in this timeline, influenced by David, Quel'Thas's future seems to be different. David, unconcerned about Quel'Thas's future, quickly read through the letter. He learned that Fordring had returned to Winter's Town today to reassure those remaining there. He also met Ratchet, who had recently arrived in Winter's Town. Tyrion is quite creative, David read. He saw Fordring asking if Ratchet could bring some Autobots to Azeroth for assistance. He didn't expect the Autobots to come to Azeroth to help them deal with the Scourge. He just wanted these Autobots, who could transform into various vehicles, to help them pull down the heavy artillery. David didn't know how to respond to Fording's question, so he could only write to tell Fording that as long as the Autobots agreed, he had no objection. Fourth update. No more for today. Chapter 137 Jaina's teleportation magic. While writing back to Fording, David realized he hadn't asked Ratchet how long he'd been on Earth. Had he just arrived? Or had he been there for a while? Given Ratchet's lack of time, the plot of the first Transformers movie must have concluded. In that movie, Ratchet had barely been on Earth when he was engaged in a series of battles, only finally being free after Megatron was defeated. If it were around this time, there would already be several Autobots on Earth. If Ratchet had summoned Optimus Prime and the rest of the Autobots to Azeroth to help Fording move some heavy artillery, it would have been a simple matter. But David suspected Fording had more in mind. The Autobot size, at a time when direct contact was necessary to reach Winterglen, offered a significant advantage. They could transport a much larger number of people to Winterglen at once. If a large number of Autobots could come to Hearthglen to help, it would also improve the safety of the ordinary residents of Hearthglen. After quickly writing a reply, David sealed it with wax and handed it to Liandrin, asking her to deliver it to the pilots who would later travel to Hearthland to maintain communication between Quel'Thalas and Hearthland. Hearthland had Griffin riders and helicopter pilots, while Quel'Thalas had Dragonhawk riders. Liandrin, undeterred by David's instructions, practically ran all the way to deliver the letter to the knight who was about to depart. Meanwhile, the Dragonhawk rider, tasked with delivering the letter, was still awaiting the king's unfinished letter. Because the knight hadn't departed, Liandrin remained by his side, watching him intently. The Dragonhawk rider felt as if time had slowed down, and every second, tiny needles of holy light pricked his body, causing him to feel a pervasive discomfort. A mere 10 minutes seemed to elapse as if 1,000 years had passed. Finally, upon receiving the king's letter, the Dragonhawk rider took off, heading towards Hearthland. Only then did Liandrin, satisfied, run back to report to David Glamorgan. While Liandrin was performing a holy light gaze on the Dragonhawk knight, David, inspired by Fordring's letter, realized something else. Does the appearance of ambulances mean that transporting things will become easier? Oh, Steve hadn't considered this, but David's mention of it made him realize. It seems so. Ambulances can carry a lot of things. David wasn't just thinking about ambulances. Among the Autobots was Optimus Prime, and this guy was a heavy truck. If he could befriend the Autobots, and establish a good relationship with their leader, Optimus Prime, it would mean that supplies from various planes could be transported using containers. This would be infinitely more convenient than relying on manpower now. For the next few days, David spent his days in Silver Moon City, enjoying a thorough tour of the High Elves' capital. There wasn't much he needed to help with, except for helping to deal with the Scourge attack on his third day. When David unleashed the vast holy light once again, transforming the entire battlefield into a realm of holy light, the Scourge once again retreated. In this environment, the Scourge's undead creatures had no chance of success. The ghouls and ordinary undead, who made up the majority of the Scourge's forces, would not last long before being purged by the holy light. Even the more powerful undead creatures would continue to suffer the damage. Their strength significantly reduced. The elves of Quel'Thalas, fighting in this holy light-soaked environment, seemed to be using cheats. Minor injuries were of no concern, and even those who sustained severe damage, as long as they weren't killed immediately, only needed a moment's recovery before they could fight the undead with vigor and vitality again. As for the priests wielding the holy light, they were like fish swimming freely in water. Their holy light felt boundless, allowing them to unleash spells upon the undead creatures with unbridled energy. Because the entire area was bathed in holy light, the elven rangers of Quel'Thalas didn't need the priests' additional healing, so the priests simply took on the mage's work. The holy light's power was so immense that the priests even developed new strategies. They would rush to where the undead were most numerous, charging into the crowds and unleashing a continuous stream of holy novas. With the battle at this point, the Scourge had no chance of victory. Especially when Arthas noticed that the priest he so feared showed no sign of fatigue after unleashing such terrifying holy light spells, he realized he might not be able to capture Silver Moon City. The most awkward part for Arthas was that even if he had made the right call, he had no power to change his strategy. The Lich King had commanded him to capture Quel'Thalas, seize the Sunwell, and resurrect Kil'Thuzad, and he had to accomplish this mission. Even with David, an incredibly powerful being, his efforts were doomed to failure. He continued his assault on Silver Moon City. Just as Arthas was considering whether to return to recruit more troops from the human kingdoms before attacking Quel'Thalas and exhausting the human with the even more terrifying undead ocean, he was attacked from behind by the forces of Lordaeron. So, this strange puppet was sent by Lordaeron. Sylvanas raised her head, her mouth slightly open, as she surveyed the massive metal giant in front of her in amazement. Hello, my name is Ratchet. I'm an Autobot from Cybertron, not some puppet. Ratchet had come to rendezvous with David and deliver a message. His presence also signaled that the Lordaeron forces had reached the outskirts of Eversong Woods and were stationed behind the Scourge. To avoid being attacked from both sides, Arthas directed the Scourge to conduct a small diversion, thus clearing a path for Ratchet to reach Silver Moon City. The ambulance arrived in Silver Moon City in the guise of a Humvee emergency vehicle. The High Elves of Silver Moon initially believed this mechanical vehicle to be a dwarven creation. But when the ambulance transformed into humanoid form, the elves were baffled. This thing looked like some kind of golem? Or perhaps a mechanical or magical puppet? Could it possibly have come from Dalaran? Or an American? When the ambulance revealed itself as a messenger from Hearthland, Delivering a message to David, the High Elves of Quel'Thalas immediately dropped their usual arrogant demeanor and politely asked the ambulance to wait while they sent someone to notify Sylvanus and David. When Sylvanus and David met the ambulance, it introduced itself to Sylvanus. Cybertron? What's that? It's the home of all the Transformers, perhaps because of Fordring's warning, or perhaps simply because he didn't want to discuss the matter. The ambulance didn't reveal the fact that he was an alien from another world. After chatting with Sylvanus for a moment, Ratchet, not forgetting his mission, gave David a detailed account of the current situation of the Lordaeron army. To give David a more intuitive understanding, Ratchet used holographic projection. This was Fordring's reason for calling Ratchet. Besides being able to flee to Winterstown at any moment in danger, the Transformers could use holographic projection to clearly convey various information. Ratchet's account revealed that not only had the reorganized Knights of the Silver Hand arrived at Eversong Woods, but even the Dwarven Riflemen and Heavy Artillery had arrived on the battlefield and established their artillery positions. Gyrocopters and Griffin Riders were conducting reconnaissance on the Scourge's situation, compiling data into various units for the Dwarven gunners to launch precise artillery strikes. David gazed at the lifelike artillery positions, amazed that Fordring had managed to move all of them from Hearthland to Eversong Woods in such a short time. How many Autobots came here? Only a few came to help. Ratchet understood David's question. We didn't help transport those heavy artillery pieces, huh? David looked up at Ratchet in surprise, awaiting his explanation. A lady named Gina Proudmoore used teleportation to send the artillery unit to Eversong Woods. Ratchet quickly explained the situation. It's truly an astonishing ability. I've only heard of a few Autobots possessing similar abilities, but I've never seen one myself. Gina? Did she go back to Dalaran? Gina had only spent one night in Silver Moon City before heading to Dalaran to persuade them to join the war against the Scourge. Why was she suddenly back at Fordring's? David realized in a split second that Gina must have quickly convinced the Kirin Tor Council and then used teleportation to reach Fordring. As for the entire artillery unit being transported to Eversong Woods, that wasn't surprising to him. In his previous life, he knew that Archmage Gina Proudmoore's most powerful magic wasn't a blizzard or the ability to soar into the sky, it was teleportation. A mass teleport capable of carrying legions of people at once, with pinpoint accuracy and a zero error rate. Because of this terrifying teleportation ability, even with Gina's dreadful reputation among both the Alliance and the Horde, no faction dared to challenge Theramore, which she ruled. Chapter 138 The Forgotten One Who Should Not Appear. Originally, David had assumed that Gina, so young and newly minted, wouldn't be able to achieve that level of skill. Now he realized he was wrong. The fact that Medivh had chosen Gina to fight the Burning Legion meant she couldn't be considered an ordinary person. With Gina's help, Tyrion doesn't have to worry about moving the heavy artillery. David felt that Gina was perfectly suited for this type of unit, which was difficult to move but packed with powerful firepower. Thinking more carefully, with Gina's teleportation abilities, any unit would be incredibly powerful in her hands. Even giving Gina a legion of pigs, teleporting them into a vulnerable part of the enemy camp, and letting them run rampant could cause immense chaos. Eversong Woods is probably going to be very noisy for a while, right? Noisy. Sylvanus wasn't entirely clear on David's words. The next day, she understood what he meant. Rumbling noises, like thunder, echoed from morning until noon, leaving most of the Rangers defending Eversong Woods in a state of bewilderment, completely confused as to what was happening. The noises were so loud and frightening that the Rangers initially thought it was some new tactic of the Scourge, and they remained on edge for a while. Later, they learned from their commanders that it was the humans of Lordaeron, allied with the Dwarven army, who were attacking the Scourge. Since the humans of Lordaeron have begun attacking the Scourge, should we help? More than one Elven Ranger asked, and the question even reached Sylvanus through the ranks of commanders. Sylvanus believed that now was the time to join forces with the armies of Lordaeron and launch a counterattack against the Scourge. However, David advised her not to rush, suggesting that Sylvanus and her Elven warriors take this time to rest and recuperate, waiting for the moment of the real counterattack. What did this mean? Sylvanus was perplexed, and for matters she didn't understand, her solution was simple and straightforward. She asked David, who knew the situation. If David refused to tell her, then she would take 2 High Elf Rangers and go see for herself what was going on. Is it Lordaeron's, or should I consider Ironforge's? Anyway, it's the Alliance's artillery unit bombarding the Scourge's positions. David found it difficult to determine who the artillery unit belonged to. Organizationally, it belonged to Tyrion Fordring, Lord of Hearthland, but the weapons and the actual gunners were all provided by the dwarves of Ironforge. It was considered Ironforge's dwarven unit, but this unit was formed by Ironforge's promise to help Fordring. Ultimately, it could only be considered an alliance army. After all, the current banner was the alliance. Artillery. While Azeroth was a world of highly developed magical civilization, that didn't mean technological advancements were obscure there. Weapons like muskets and cannons had long been invented, having been known and familiar to Alliance members during the first two wars against the Orcs. But Sylvanus's impression of artillery wasn't of such a formidable display. As time passed, the distant rumbling not only continued to grow intensified, but even grew more frightening. Even the ground could be faintly shaken. "Can I go take a look?" Because the Scourge's camp had relocated, the path between the elves of Quel'Thalas and the human forces of Lordaeron was no longer blocked. "Yes. But there's no need to make a special trip," David explained. "The ambulance just informed me that Tyrion Fordring, along with a number of paladins of the Order of the Silver Hand and Dwarven Musketeers, is en route to help Quel'Thalas defend against the Scourge." The added benefit of the ambulance being here was that David had instant communication with Fordring, allowing him to instantly learn of any arrangements. Similarly, if David encountered any problems, he could immediately seek Fordring's assistance. Sylvanus glanced at the ambulance standing nearby. While she didn't know the specific means used, she guessed that the metal giant had been able to contact the human forces of Lordaeron. Only paladins and dwarven musketeers, of course. There will also be the artillery you're curious about, but those will be teleported here by the mage Jaina Proudmoore. The magical barrier surrounding Quel'Thalas had been destroyed, allowing Jaina to teleport directly to Quel'Thalas without worrying about being blocked or interrupted by the barrier. As the two spoke, the sound of galloping horses could be heard from the front, accompanied by the shouting of various loud voices. Even before they saw anyone, both Sylvanus and David guessed that the chants were coming from the dwarven musketeers. The rangers of Quel'Thalas looked down upon these crude dwarves wielding muskets. But no elf would show disdain for the dwarven musketeers now. After all, they had come to help. While the elves of Quel'Thalas were proud, most of them were not arrogant to the point of being insane. Soon, the Silver Hand Paladins, led by Tyrion Fordring, and numerous dwarven musketeers arrived at Quel'Thalas' outer defenses. Almost instantly, a vast expanse of magical light appeared in the open space near the ambulance. As the purple arcane light faded, countless cannons and dwarven artillery appeared, completely filling the once spacious area with countless shells. "Greetings, I am Tyrion Fordring, son of Tyrion Fordring, Lord of Hearthland. I have been ordered to support Quel'Thalas." Accompanying Tyrion was Bridget Abitus, daughter of Alfred Abitus, and Darian Mograine, son of Alexandros Mograine. These three young men served as the commander and deputy commander of the force, with Tyrion at the head. "I am Sylvanus Windrunner, Ranger General of Quel'Thalas. Welcome." Quel'Thalas is grateful for the assistance of its allies. After a brief introduction, Teelan inquired about the situation in Quel'Thalas and then began deploying artillery positions according to Sylvanus's defensive arrangements. David remained silent throughout, observing the excitement from the sidelines. Furthermore, he noticed he wasn't the only one there. "You're here too?" "Yes," Laura glanced around curiously. She was deeply intrigued by elves, a mythical creature that existed only in fiction. Especially since David had arrived in Quel'Thalas and settled directly in Silver Moon City, her curiosity about elves had intensified. She wanted to see which elf possessed such a powerful allure. "Where's Sharon?" David vaguely sensed something was amiss, but he didn't dwell on it. Instead, he wondered why Sharon hadn't come along to watch the fun. "Sharon's back in Winterstown. It's Mark who's here today." "Mark?" David was a little surprised. "Not Peggy. Mark seems to want to gain more insights here so he can master the shamanic knowledge as quickly as possible." "I see." After glancing around for a while, Laura even glanced at Silver Moon City, not far away, expressing a little admiration for this majestic high elf capital. Then she kept looking at Sylvanus Windrunner, who is not far away. "Oh, is this Sylvanus?" "Yes, she's a celebrity. She's got a great figure and stunning looks," Laura praised heartily. "I heard you saved her from Arthas's sword. Just happened to be there. Come to think of it, you were planning to save her, right?" Laura whispered, seeming to recall something. "And by the way, through Sylvanus, recruit some high elves to live in Wintertown." Recruiting high elves doesn't necessarily mean saving her. David had never concealed his desire to recruit more residents. He considered anyone who could increase Wintertown's potential, and the High Elves of Quel'Thalas were naturally not to be overlooked. I saved her to prevent further tragedy. You mean, the Forsaken? Laura was intelligent. Having previously brushed up on some warcraft knowledge, she was well aware of the future development of Azeroth. Yes, that's a group that shouldn't have been born. The undead, due to their unique form of existence, naturally conflicted with the living. This contradiction is irreconcilable, especially considering that the Forsaken, in history, had occupied Lordaeron and established the Undercity. David had previously pledged his support for Fordring, whose ultimate goal now was to destroy the Scourge and revive the Kingdom of Lordaeron. By rescuing Sylvanas, he indirectly eliminated the Forsaken leader, mitigating potential future trouble. Is there not even a shred of personal thought involved? What personal thought could I have? Laura pursed her lips in an inscrutable expression, then smiled and patted David's lower back. Okay, enough teasing. She then led David to a pink and purple motorcycle and said, "Let me introduce you, this is RC." David had a clue the moment he saw the motorcycle, and Laura's introduction made it clear. "Hello, RC." "Hello, David, nice to meet you." RC transformed into humanoid form, to the stunned eyes of the surrounding elves. She extended her hand and gently shook David's. David looked at the Autobot, who was about the same size as an ordinary human, and asked curiously, "Besides you and Ratchet, who else came?" "Optimus Prime, Ironhide, Bumblebee, Sideswipe, Shake. Basically every Autobot on Earth came this time." Chapter 139, Preheated Bento. Through conversations with RC, David learned a great deal about the Autobots. Upon returning, Ratchet quickly shared his miraculous encounter with Optimus Prime and several other Autobots on Earth. The Autobots' reactions to Wintertown varied widely. Some believed it might be a haven beyond Earth, while others suggested Ratchet had been tricked. Ultimately, Optimus Prime insisted on personally investigating the situation and considering its true impact on the Autobot race. Determined to gain insight, he even considered speaking with David, the ruler of Wintertown. So, upon receiving the invitation, he and his companions arrived. Upon arriving in Azeroth, he discovered that humanity was suffering under the ravages of the Scourge. Optimus, being a man of character, would not sit idly by, so he offered to lend a hand. The Autobots were now assisting the Lordaeron army, particularly in deploying artillery positions and transporting supplies. At the same time, the Autobots' communication capabilities were perfectly utilized by the Lordaeron army, especially by unique beings like the RC sisters, whose three bodies shared a single consciousness. The RC sisters in the film version were actually just one Autobot. RC, Alita and Claudia weren't true individuals, but rather creations based on RC's memories of her two deceased sisters. I see. Upon hearing that the Autobots were now converging on the Lordaeron army, David suddenly felt a strong desire to meet the Autobot leader. Although Optimus Prime himself was often criticized as a traitor and a saint, he was still a great leader with the added bonus of a childhood. David couldn't wait for the chance to meet him in person. With the arrival of reinforcements from Lordaeron and Quel'Thalas, the High Elves had passed their most dangerous period, and his continued presence was no longer necessary. "Tell Tyrion I'll go find him." David wasn't from Lordaeron, nor was he under Tyrion Fordring's command. His original purpose in coming to Quel'Thalas was to locate Arthas. Now that issue had been resolved, there was no reason for him to linger. David prepared to meet with Optimus Prime to discuss with the Autobot leader the possibility of Winterhold accepting Cybertronian refugees. Acting immediately, David prepared to bid farewell to His Majesty the King of Quel'Thalas. His Majesty, an Asterian Sunstrider, had been so kind to him during this time, and now that he was leaving, he felt it was polite to say goodbye. The king was deeply saddened to see David go, and he spoke warmly with David for a long time, repeatedly assuring him that Baron David Glamorgan would always be welcome in Quel'Thalas. After learning from Lordaeron that Baron David Glamorgan was the Lord of Winterhold, His Majesty even considered sending an envoy to Winterhold to maintain a long-term relationship. I wholeheartedly agree with your Majesty's proposal. However, establishing interdimensional diplomacy required a number of solutions, and David could only manage with polite words for the time being. He then summoned Steve and Laura and prepared to travel by ambulance to Fordring's camp. Unexpectedly, there was an extra passenger on board. "Are you coming with us to meet with Tyrion Fordring?" David, looking at Sylvanas Windrunner beside him, guessed the Ranger General was going to discuss the battle plan for the attack on the Scourge face-to-face with Tyrion Fordring. Discuss how to cooperate and defeat the Scourge? Yes, Sylvanas nodded. As the commander of Quel'Thalis's army, she needed to meet with the Lordaeron commander to discuss how the two sides could cooperate. And who would be the leader of the two armies? Of course, the answer to that last question had already been given. Now that Quel'Thalis needed Lordaeron's troops to defend it, the High Elves could only serve as a component of the Alliance's forces, not the main force. Inside the ambulance, Sylvanas curiously surveyed the various strange devices surrounding her. Through the glass window on the rear door, she could clearly see Quel'Thalis speeding away. In the back of the car, along with David, sat Laura. Carrying a hunting bow and quiver, she caught Sylvanas's attention. "Hello, my name is Laura Croft." Although they had met several times before, it was only now that Laura had the chance to introduce herself to Sylvanas. Sylvanas Windrunner, Ranger of Quel'Thalis. Sylvanas nodded at Laura. Compared to her own kind, she held no disdain for human hunters. After all, it was Sylvanas who had trained and mentored the first human ranger on Azeroth. Thinking of that person, Sylvanas's mood suddenly darkened. Previously, her focus had been entirely on defending Quel'Thalis, even nearly dying at the hands of the Scourge. She hadn't had time to think about anything else. Now, with the crisis in Quel'Thalis largely resolved and the Alliance forces preparing to launch a counterattack against the Scourge, she finally had time to reflect on some personal matters. What's the situation like in other parts of Lordaeron besides Hearthland? David paused for a second, then realized Sylvanas was asking him. "I'm not entirely sure. I'm not from Lordaeron, and I flew directly from Hearthland to Quel'Thalis on a griffin." Sylvanas didn't get an answer from David, but she suspected the situation wasn't good. The Scourge's power was terrifying. Having faced it firsthand, Sylvanas knew the despair and powerlessness of ordinary people facing the undead. But, maybe they could escape? After all, they were people she'd personally mentored. Silence suddenly fell in the car. Fortunately, the ambulance was moving quickly, and the group arrived at the Lordaeron army camp without much lingering awkwardness. As the ambulance slowed, Sylvanas peered through the window and spotted the Silverhand Paladins and the Dwarven Musketeers, each armed with a Garand rifle. As the ambulance stopped and everyone alighted, Sylvanas took a moment to examine the muskets in the dwarves' hands. These dwarven weapons are becoming increasingly simple and crude. David had expected Sylvanas to be curious about the power of these new rifles, but he wasn't expecting such a comment. But upon closer inspection, the High Elves' equipment revealed that this race truly cherished opulence, and it was perfectly natural for them to look down on the simple Garand rifles. Entering the camp, David noticed that the number of soldiers was small, and the constant artillery fire that had been ringing out earlier was now silent. Suddenly realizing something, David quickly inquired of the nearby Silverhand Paladin, "Is Tyrion Fordring in camp?" "The High Lord left the camp not long ago." The Lordaeron soldiers knew the Cybertronians in the ambulance as their comrades. Even if they didn't recognize David, they knew the men who had just exited the vehicle were allies. Especially since there was a High Elf clearly from Quel'Thalis nearby. "Who's the commander of the camp now?" "General Abydos." David, having received the answer, quickly led a few men to Alfred Abydos. General Abydos held David in high esteem for single-handedly resisting the Scourge's attack, defending Quel'Thalis and ensuring the Alliance's army would not lose the strength of the High Elf Kingdom. David's willingness to aid Fordring and his display of strength in Quel'Thalis had earned him the respect of the surviving high-ranking officials of Lordaeron. "I'm very pleased to see you return victorious, Baron Glamorgan." "You're welcome, General Abydos." After a few brief pleasantries, Abydos, without waiting for David's inquiries, launched into an overview of the current situation. After the Lordaeron artillery launched a relentless barrage, Arthas, who had lost so many soldiers in a moment of confusion, could no longer remain. If the bombardment continued like this, within a day, there would likely be only a few undead left. Then, how could they possibly fight Quel'Thalis? Seizing the opportunity, Arthas led the Scourge directly towards the Lordaeron camp. Having learned of the situation through the Griffin Riders' reconnaissance, Tyrion Fordring, along with Alexandros Mograine, the Knights of the Silver Hand, and some Dwarven riflemen, immediately set out to meet the enemy. "Those Cybertronians are also traveling with us," General Abydos sighed. "Those Cybertronians are truly a great help, allowing the artillery, which was previously difficult to move, to be quickly deployed and positioned. I believe they will give that traitor Arthas a great surprise." "Which direction is the battlefield?" General Abydos summoned 2 paladins and instructed them to guide David to the battlefield and find Tyrion Fordring. "Don't worry about Tyrion and the others," General Abydos had intended to reassure David. He doubted that Fordring and Mograine, working together, could defeat Arthas. Unexpectedly, David wasn't worried about Fordring at all, he simply didn't want to miss out on the battle. "I'd rather be there to witness this than from behind." The Lich King's premature farewell, it's not often seen, especially in an ending that deviates drastically from the original trajectory. Arthas is leaving before he even becomes Lich King. Quickly boarding the ambulance, David realized he wasn't the only one eager to witness this historic moment. Steve, Laura, even Sylvanus were quick-tracked. Even Alfred Abendis's face showed a hint of conflict, but he resisted boarding because of his position as commander, which required him to remain at the camp. Ambulance, move. Today's extra update. Chapter 140 Arthas Must Die. The battlefield where Tyrion Fordring faced Arthas was not far from Lordaeron's camp, located on a plain southeast of Eversong Woods. This open terrain was ideal for a decisive battle. When David arrived, Tyrion Fordring and Alexandros Mograine, both fully armed and mounted on war horses, awaited the arrival of the Scourge. Besides Fordring and Mograine, David also encountered Autobots led by Optimus Prime on the Lordaeron front. Apparently, after helping to deploy artillery positions, Optimus and his Autobots did not intend to remain behind, but instead joined the fight against the Scourge. Perhaps it was the Scourge's brutal annihilation of all life that swiftly convinced Optimus Prime to join the battle. As David disembarked from the ambulance and approached Fordring, he noticed the priest Isolene also present. The dwarven commander, Burim Goldhammer, was also fully armed, wielding a heavy hammer and riding a goat, the dwarven's signature mount. "You came straight from Quel'Therlas," Fordring greeted David warmly, his demeanor as if the impending battle were no big deal. "I met Alfred Abendis at the camp and learned of your situation from him, so I rushed here." David briefly explained the situation and introduced Sylvanus. "This is the Ranger General of Quel'Therlas." Sylvanus nodded to Tyrion Fordring. She was certainly familiar with this Paladin, renowned throughout Azeroth. However, she was most curious about whether this renowned Paladin was as powerful as David beside him. According to the information she had gathered, Fordring had immediately stopped the Scourge's advance upon his return to Hearthland, making Hearthland the only region of Lordaeron spared from the Scourge's conquest. David, after arriving in Quel'Therlas, had single-handedly driven back the Scourge. From this information, it seemed likely that both of them were extremely powerful users of the Holy Light. But Sylvanus secretly believed that David was more powerful. After all, she had experienced up close the divine light radiated by this young human, and it was truly astonishing. But no matter who is stronger, facing the combined might of these two, Arthas's end is imminent. After briefly greeting Fordring and Mograine, Sylvanus cast her gaze upon the faintly emerging Scourge undead across from her. She spotted a familiar face among the undead. More precisely, a face that had once been incredibly familiar, now strange and sinister. Sylvanus Windrunner, ever since her birth, had always prided herself on her exceptional vision, and for the first time, she wished her sight wasn't so strong, so that perhaps she wouldn't have seen that person. Still couldn't escape, she had long anticipated this possibility. After failing to gain sufficient recognition for his human identity in Quel'Therlas, Nathanis Maris, Azeroth's first human ranger, finally left Quel'Therlas and returned to his home, Maris Farm. Maris Farm was located within the Kingdom of Lordaeron. With the Scourge ravaging the entire kingdom, leaving only Hearthland unscathed, it was no surprise that Nathanis had become a Scourged undead. But before she saw it with her own eyes, Sylvanus could still believe that perhaps Nathanis had escaped through his extraordinary strength. As long as she couldn't see it with her own eyes, hope remained. However, this already slim hope was shattered. Closing her eyes and taking a deep breath, Sylvanus opened them again, her gaze filled with determination. In the battles against the Scourge, she had personally slain former comrades who had become undead more than once. Today, she was determined to free Nathanis from his suffering, to help him finally break free from the Scourge's shackles and find true peace. David and Fordring exchanged a few words as Sylvanus determined her objectives on this battlefield. "Do you need my help? Just support us from behind." Fordring drew out the two-handed hammer Will had crafted for him. It had never been named, but as Fordring used it to help restore Lordaeron, it was sure someone would soon choose a suitable name. Much like the massive kitchen knife in Mograine's hand, it had already earned the name Ashbringer. For Lordaeron, Fordring glanced around, making sure everyone was ready. He raised his hammer high, shouted, and led the charge. His target was Arthas, and he would do everything in his power to defeat the former Prince of Lordaeron. Knowing the plot well, Fordring held Arthas in high regard. Not only did he not consider a one-on-one duel, he mobilized every available force he could muster, striving for a decisive victory that day, to completely eliminate this formidable threat. Kill Arthas, and the Scourge would lose its most important leader. Kill Arthas, and the Burning Legion would lose a crucial tool that would help them open the portal. Kill Arthas, and the kingdom of Lord Durin would be revived. Kill Arthas, and the history of Azeroth would be altered, proving his power to change everything. Therefore, no matter what, Arthas must die today. Fordring charged into the boundless sea of undead, but ordinary undead proved no match for his advance. He quickly reached Arthas, his hammer blazing with a holy light even brighter than before, and smashed down upon him. Joining him in the fight was Alexandros Mograine, whose Ashbringer also erupted in brilliant light, slashing at Arthas from the side. Whether defending against Fordring's hammer or Mograine's slash, Arthas would have to withstand the full force of the other's blow. Faced with this situation, Arthas had few options but to charge at Fordring. Using Frostmourne to take Fordring's heavy blow, he used Fordring's strength to drop from his horse and avoid Mograine's slash. However, these two weren't the only ones charging Arthas. As Arthas landed, barely able to even steady himself, a familiar round shield flew from the side. Clang! Frostmourne deflected the round shield, and he immediately dodged to the side, avoiding the holy fire unleashed by Iceline. However, Arthas, under continuous attack, was unable to completely avoid the attack. The holy fire struck his shoulder and half of his arm. The flames of the holy light burned fiercely through him, continuously dissolving the death force, withering force, within him. He mobilized the strength in his body to extinguish the sacred fire, then glanced at Tyrion, Fordring and Mograine who had just jumped off their horses in front of him, then looked at the paladin he met in Quel'Thalas on the side, and finally glanced at Iceline who was farther away. After discovering that it was not the person he thought, he immediately looked around, and finally turned to look at Steve on his right. "What's your name, Steve Rogers?" Steve was surprised that this person suddenly asked his name, but still answered the other's question. "You are a very powerful paladin. After you die by my hand, I will make you my own." Arthas made no secret of his admiration for Steve, then asked, "Where's the priest with you?" "You mean David?" Steve saw the man staring at him intently, as if afraid to miss a single word, and he knew how much Arthas feared David. "He's to your left." Seeing Arthas turn his head, Steve immediately unleashed Avenger's Shield, a shield imbued with a vast holy light, flying towards Arthas. Simultaneously, he stomped his right foot onto the ground, sending earth elementals pulsing beneath Arthas's feet, nearly knocking him off balance. Turning to his left, but missing the priest, Arthas knew he'd been tricked. He didn't even need to look back to know what was about to happen. Mograine and Fordring had already pounced, and Iceline was preparing a more powerful attack. As the crowd assaulted Arthas, David stood on the side of an ambulance, carefully observing the entire battlefield. As the Alliance army clashed and mingled with the Scourge, and Fordring, Mograine, and the others engaged Arthas, he took a deep breath and reminded Ratchet, standing beneath him, to maintain his form and not suddenly transform and be thrown flying. "I understand, David." Though unsure of what David was about to do, Ratchet assured him that even if the undead creatures smashed his windshield and chewed through his tires, he wouldn't suddenly transform. "It won't be that dramatic, and they can't get close to you." Ratchet was surrounded by other Autobots and Paladins of the Silver Hand, making him impossible for ordinary undead to approach. Furthermore, once he unleashed his ultimate, the undead would be even more unable to reach him. At that point, David would be surrounded by the densest area of holy light, and any undead that came his way would be completely purged. With so many undead, I wonder if light-forged undead creatures will appear. David took a deep breath, then raised his right hand once again. A vast column of holy light condensed into a beam, shooting straight up into the sky, tinting the entire sky golden hue. This time, the beam David unleashed was countless times thicker than the previous two. Even he himself was engulfed in the rich holy energy, becoming part of the beam. This immense holy light not only transformed the entire battlefield into a realm of holy light, but also formed a golden, translucent wall of light at the outermost edge, trapping the Scourge within this area. Chapter 141 Holy Light Domain. David, having unleashed a field of holy light that sealed off the entire battlefield, felt his body undergo a miraculous transformation under the immense impact of the holy light. His body became more balanced. The strength and resilience of his head and back, previously granted by Squirtle and Leon, gradually spread throughout his body as the holy light washed over him. Furthermore, the two enhancements, originating from different parts of his body and origins, combined, creating a greater than average effect. Furthermore, the physical potential David had previously gained from fording was now activated by the holy light. Most unexpectedly, David also received a physical enhancement from Ratchet. After receiving sufficient energy, this special state was also activated. With a single thought, David's body transformed into Cybertronian form, the silicon-based life form of the Transformers, while the holy light within him coalesced into core similar to a spark. In his Cybertron form, David's physical strength was significantly enhanced, especially his energy tolerance, far exceeding his normal state. This was the fundamental reason he could still stand firmly and continue unleashing his ultimate move, Holy Light Field. Furthermore, he felt a slight shift in his thinking ability. His brain speed had increased, and he could process multiple messages simultaneously. Previously, when he used Holy Light to perceive every corner of an area, he couldn't process so much information simultaneously and could only focus on a single area. But in Cybertron form, he could easily grasp all events in all areas without any confusion. For example, at this moment, he could clearly see the Knights of the Silver Hand on the battlefield. Upon discovering they were bathed in an endless stream of holy light, their internal energy seemingly inexhaustible, almost every Paladin simultaneously activated Divine Shield, howling and charging into the throng of undead, brandishing their weapons wildly. The priests, who had been accompanying the team to provide medical care, abandoned their duties when they saw their comrades around them needlessly heal. Every human and dwarven soldier, healed by the pervasive holy light as soon as they sustained damage. Like the Paladins, they charged into the monster hordes with shields raised, unleashing a continuous stream of holy novas. The dwarven musketeers stopped forming formations and firing, but instead charged forward, their garrons raised and howling. Occasionally, when they ran out of ammunition and were confronted by undead, they would draw their hand axes, one-handed maces, and other weapons to dispatch the undead, quickly reloading and repeating the previous operation. David noticed that while the dwarven-made Garand rifles had undergone some improvements, their inherent shortcomings hadn't been addressed. The finger-biting issue persisted. David had seen countless dwarven musketeers get their fingers bitten by Garands. Of course, unlike the fragile earthlings, these dwarves likely didn't consider it a life-threatening matter. It was just a bite from the rifle. Was this a big deal? With the dwarves' tough, thick skin and sturdy physique, the Garands couldn't bite them. It was nothing compared to the Earth soldiers, who often suffered broken fingers. David found this situation amusing, and continued to admire the interesting events unfolding on the battlefield. Taking advantage of the special state of his Cybertronian body to perform delicate operations. For example, he suddenly released a burst of holy fire next to a dwarf busy reloading, cremating an undead who was about to launch a sneak attack. Another example was when Sylvanus and Nathanas were fighting. He suddenly released a burst of holy fire, severely wounding Nathanas. Just as Sylvanus used arcane shot to kill him, he followed up with another burst of holy fire, bringing complete relief to Azeroth's first human ranger. From then on, there would be no more Nathanas Blightcaller in this world. After helping Sylvanus accomplish this, David also gave Sylvanus a holy light shield to protect her from the chaos. He also added a burst of holy fire to Arthas, who was caught in the melee, further devastating his situation and completely destroying the ghosts that constantly followed him. Priests have so few offensive tools. Their main attacks are Smite, Holy Fire, and Holy Nova. Of these, Holy Fire and Holy Nova aren't something every cleric learns or even masters, meaning many low-level clerics only have Smite as an offensive spell. It's no wonder that after the First War, Archbishop Alonsus Fael lamented the cleric's lack of combat effectiveness and created the Paladin, a class more suited to battlefield combat. While David lamented this, he continued to monitor the battle. With the blessing of the Holy Field, the Alliance army seemed to have unlimited health and mana, and everyone experienced the feeling of unparalleled mowing. In this environment, the Scourge were as fragile as ordinary Azerothian animals. At some point, the Autobots stopped fighting and slowly retreated to the ambulance. The Autobots led by Optimus Prime truly disliked the Scourge's wanton slaughter and were willing to aid the living creatures of Azeroth in dealing with them. However, with the outcome clearly decided, the Autobots under Optimus Prime would not indulge in the bloodbath. They knew when to stop. Furthermore, there was another reason for them to stop. That was David. Optimus Prime had come here to speak with David face to face. Now that the living creatures of Azeroth were on the verge of being freed from the Scourge's threat, Optimus Prime felt his mission had been successfully accomplished and he could now attend to his own affairs. However, upon approaching, he discovered that David, the Lord of Winter, had practically merged with the energy known as Holy Light. The thick beam of light even obscured the ambulance. Even standing nearby, the Autobots couldn't make out the ambulance's shape. They could only vaguely make out the thick pillar of light, perhaps with a pedestal at its base. After waiting quietly for a moment, Optimus Prime noticed that more and more Azerothians were slowly gathering around him, primarily armored paladins of the Knights of the Silver Hand. As the Scourge undead on the battlefield were gradually cleared, regardless of who killed them, holy fire descended from the sky, perfectly disposing of their bodies. Therefore, the Alliance soldiers on the battlefield didn't even need to clean up the battlefield. After defeating the undead, they would help their comrades clear out the remaining undead. If no more undead were found nearby, they would retreat to the rendezvous point. Only the dwarven musketeers wandered around, searching for discarded magazines. This rendezvous point, where the pillar of light lay, had been chosen by everyone on the battlefield in unison. As a result, the crowd around David grew larger and larger, with one paladin even kneeling on one knee before the massive pillar of holy light, eyes closed, and head bowed in prayer. A small number of priests knelt on their knees, hands clasped together, praying devoutly to the beam of light David had unleashed. The cult of the holy light doesn't practice personality cults, and rather than believing in the holy light, they believe in a certain philosophy of life. However, faced with such a stunning holy light user, these followers inevitably equated David with the holy light and their own beliefs. In their eyes, David Glamorgan was the embodiment of the holy light, believing it was impossible for a human to unleash such a vast amount of holy light. After all, even powerful beings like Uther and Fordring couldn't accomplish what David was doing. The recent battle had especially empowered all followers of the holy light. They could feel the holy light filing their bodies and sense its source. And the omnipresent divine fire was like divine retribution against the undead, creatures unfit for existence in this world. After experiencing this, the paladins of the Silver Hand and the priests of the cult of the Holy Light could no longer regard David as an ordinary follower of the Holy Light. Even after this battle, David's status in the hearts of Lordaeron's followers of the Holy Light surpassed that of several of the original paladins, including Fordring, Archbishop Alonsis Faol, the Menethil royal family, and the Kingdom of Lordaeron. If David had so desired, he could have even raised an army in Azeroth even more fanatical than the Scarlet Crusade. David felt a mixture of amusement and anguish. He felt that if this continued, he would be manipulated into some strange position by these fanatics. So, after confirming that Arthas was at the end of his strength and could not escape, David gradually reduced his holy light output and began to reduce the reach of the holy light's field. Only after Arthas's Frostmourne was shattered by the Ashbringer and he fell under Tyrion Fordring's hammer, with no scourge nearby to help him recover, did David retract the holy light's field. Before the beam dissipated, he transformed back to his normal form. However, looking at the followers of the holy light kneeling around the ambulance, his joy was tempered by a headache. He hoped to have countless loyal subordinates, but he didn't want them to be fanatics. That wouldn't be a good thing, as they might cause some bizarre mischief. Just as David was thinking about what to say, Ratchet suddenly said, "Keep going." "Why did you stop?" Chapter 142. Leave me your contact information. Ignoring the ambulance, still lingering on the holy light's energy, David leaped to his feet, gliding past the crowd and landing safely outside. He then headed towards where Fordring and Mograine were besieging Arthas. The paladins, noticing David's actions, rose to their feet and followed him towards Arthas's position. From a distance, it looked as if David was walking alone, with a vast army following behind him. Steve greeted David as he approached. Steve vaguely sensed something different about David, but upon closer inspection, he couldn't discern a change. Steve didn't dwell on this. Instead, Fordring, with his greater understanding of the holy light and his own vast knowledge, was the first to notice what had changed in David. David had grown stronger. Now, with pure physical strength alone, David could easily crush most Azerothian warriors. There were likely other changes beyond this, but it required David's personal explanation. Fordring couldn't grasp David's situation with a single glance. After all, he lacked detection skills or spells. Are you prepared to witness the end of Prince Arthas Menethil up close? After all, he represents an era. David had indeed come to witness Arthas's demise. After all, This prince represented years of his memories and had influenced the course of Azeroth's history. Do you want to personally end this era? No, that's your duty. Fordring nodded. It was indeed his duty. He raised his hammer high, unleashing all the holy light within him. Under its gaze, the hammer transformed into a miniature sun, seemingly consuming everything. With a resounding thud, Arthas, who had been lying on the ground, was crushed by Fordring's hammer, leaving not a trace of his remains. There were no last words, no harsh words like "I'll be back." Arthas passed away peacefully. Fordring stared at the crater he had created, holding his warhammer upside down in his hand, staring blankly at it. Mograine had no idea what Fordring was thinking, simply assuming he was mourning the calamity that had befallen Lordaeron and the near extinction of the Menethil clan. Only David knew Fordring's thoughts were more complex. Upon learning of the calamities that would soon befall Azeroth, Fordring resolved to change them. But altering Azeroth's history was no easy task. Putting aside the unique character of the Bronze Dragons, simply considering Arthas's corruption and the devastation of the Scourge, it was no easy task. Numerous conspirators were involved in Arthas's fall. The Burning Legion, the Lich King, the Dreadlords, corrupted human mages, and other forces converged to create Arthas, the perfect tool for the Burning Legion's ultimate goal of reintroducing the Burning Legion into Azeroth. Later in the Warcraft game, Arthas became entangled in the Shadowlands, creating a tangled web of forces. Although Fordring was determined, he also harbored a lingering doubt about his success. In this situation, the support of David and his fellow Winterstown comrades was crucial. Furthermore, as David's abilities grew, his companions provided not only moral and technical support, but also physical assistance. While Fordring felt joy at his dedication, the pressure within him also grew. He didn't want to disappoint his companions, nor did he want to betray the kingdom of Lordaeron or the people of Hearthland who believed in him. He desperately wanted to change everything. Only now, after personally killing Arthas, did this immense pressure finally ease. With a long sigh, Fordring suddenly felt a warmth throughout his body. Looking up, he noticed a beam of light descending from the sky, illuminating Fordring alone. Glancing at David beside him, he immediately realized David had done it and understood why. Turning to look around, he saw not only countless paladins of the Silver Hand and priests of the Church of the Light, but even his old friend Alexandros Mograine, staring at him in shock. He shook his head inwardly, then said to David in the common tongue of Brunnian, "You're thinking too simply. It won't achieve the desired effect. It doesn't matter, as long as you can help me share some of the pressure." Besides, David wasn't a native of Azeroth, his focus was always on Winterfell. Perhaps Fordring needed his reputation here more than he did himself. More miracles would provide him with more amulets, preventing him from being demoted to commoner and expelled from the Silver Hand. The pillar of light slowly faded, and the paladins gathered their composure. They felt their lives had been worthwhile. Not only had they participated in a crucial and magnificent battle, saving the nearly collapsed kingdom of Lordaeron, but they had also witnessed numerous miracles. The embodiment of the holy light stood before them, and Tyrion Fordring, already renowned, once again received the light's blessing. Everyone believed that, under the light's protection, the kingdom of Lordaeron would regain its position as humanity's foremost power, and all the suffering it faced would vanish. The troops assembled and prepared to return to camp. Since the battlefield didn't need cleaning, the aftermath was easy to handle. The only thing left to be cleared was Frostmourne, shattered by Mograine. Fordring gathered the fragments of the two-handed greatsword and considered what to do with it. How about taking it back to Winterfell? I don't think Will is capable of restoring this artifact right now. Fordring looked at David speechlessly. He hadn't expected Will to reforge Frostmourne in the first place, and he didn't want this weapon, imbued with the power of death, to be restored. David knew Fordring simply wanted to banish Frostmourne from Azeroth. He was just joking. I can take it back, but it'd be best to get a special box to ensure that no death power leaks out. Yes, it should be kept carefully. Fordring decided to have the dwarves make a box out of cast iron, lock the fragments inside, and give the box to David for safekeeping. Or maybe just have Mark take the box to Mars and bury it? Isn't there anything there? He led the troops back to the camp and chatted with David about the next steps. Upon hearing Fordring's question, David simply stated that since Arthas had been killed, the kingdom of Lordaeron had solved its biggest problem, and he would return to Winterfell. Well, I really don't need to bother you with what's coming next. Fordring also felt that David had made a bit of a commotion, and he now noticed the uneasy looks from the surrounding paladins and priests. The remaining undead can be completely eliminated with the Knights of the Silver Hand. Even if we encounter some troublesome opponents, we still have Alexandros and me, even if the two of them were busy with official duties and had no time to take action. Leaving those young men alone would be enough to eliminate the ordinary undead. But it's best to stay a few days before leaving. I think many people will want to see you soon, Fording stated the truth in a joking tone. I don't want to do nothing all day, constantly shuttling between two worlds. Fording's words were quickly confirmed. Upon returning to the Lordaeron military camp, David had some free time, and he had the opportunity to chat with Optimus Prime, the Autobot leader. They reached a certain consensus. If any Autobots wanted to find a safe and peaceful place to live instead of the endless battles with the Decepticons, then Optimus Prime would have no objection to them heading to Winterfell. Meanwhile, Cybertronians unwilling to join either the Autobots or the Decepticons could be sent to Winterstown. Beyond that, no alliance was forged, and David hadn't expressed his willingness to aid Optimus Prime against the Decepticons. However, both sides were pleased with the initial results of their interactions. David felt he had gained a new source of residence, a unique Cybertronian at that. Optimus Prime felt he had found a good place, a safe haven and retreat for his people. After reaching a simple verbal agreement with David, Optimus said goodbye to Fording and led the Autobots out of Azeroth, later returning to Earth with Ratchet's help. However, the three RC sisters remained in Winterstown, and Ratchet, like Steve, no longer spent much time on Earth. Instead, he traveled back and forth between the two worlds to maintain contact. After the Autobots left, David remained quiet for 2 days, before his peaceful life was shattered. First, Sylvanus, representing His Majesty Anasterian Sunstrider, came to discuss formal diplomatic relations between Quel'Thalas and Winterhold with David. Jaina, representing Dalaran, soon arrived, also proposing formal diplomatic ties with Winterhold. Even the permanent diplomat stationed in Winterhold had been chosen, Jaina Proudmoore. Later, Fordring approached, expressing His Highness Princess Kalia Menethel's desire to establish formal diplomatic ties with Winterhold, to maintain a long-lasting friendship. Compared to the other two kingdoms, the Kingdom of Lordaeron was more generous to David, who had come to their aid in this critical moment. According to Fordring, if David didn't already have his own domains, the Kingdom of Lordaeron would have made him Grand Duke of Strathallam. Furthermore, because of David's miracles, he had already been hailed as Saint David by countless Knights of the Silver Hand. If David accepted the title of Grand Duke of Strathallam, the Kingdom of Lordaeron was even willing to change Strathallam to Saint Strathallam or Saint Glamorgan. That's a bit exaggerated, isn't it? Are you sure you're not kidding? Seeing David's embarrassed expression, Fording calmly confirmed his seriousness. The commotion you made earlier was truly astonishing. Extra chapters today. Don't just focus on the number of updates. 3 chapters a day at 3,000 words per chapter, that's nearly 10,000 words a day. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143 Diplomats from Azeroth. David knew his commotion was a bit exaggerated, and he tried to control it, but he couldn't. He hadn't accepted the position of Grand Duke of Strathallam. He had finally begun to get on the right track on the continent of Brunia, and he wasn't about to start all over again and find a new home. Crucially, he knew Azeroth was not at peace. Events would escalate one after another, with no end in sight. Even if Arthas and Kel'Thuzad were killed, there were still several dreadlords lurking in the shadows, stirring up trouble. By comparison, Winterhold was much more stable. So, what about establishing formal diplomatic relations? How do you do that? David spread his hands, as if, regardless of formality, anyone in Azeroth could only contact David through Tiran Fordring. I mean, a formal written agreement. Oh, that's no problem. David couldn't think of any reason to refuse. Would establishing diplomatic relations with Quel'Thalas, Dalaran, and the Kingdom of Lordaeron be detrimental to Winterhold? He couldn't imagine any. What about the benefits? David had several ideas in mind, for example, requesting a few mages from Quel'Thalas and Dalaran to assist Winterfell. Presumably, neither would object. As for David's territory not being in Azeroth, but on another world, Dalaran would likely already know. As fellow Alliance members, Lordaeron and Quel'Thalas would likely learn of this information quickly, even without David and Fordring's explanation. Therefore, there was no need to conceal his origins. Over the next few days, David primarily signed documents and met with Antonidas, the current leader of Dalaran, an Asterian Sunstrider, king of Quel'Thalas, and Kali Amenethil, the confirmed heir to the throne of Lordaeron and queen of Lordaeron. During these meetings, not much was discussed. It was more like a casual chat about local customs and culture. Then, Dalaran, Lordaeron and Quel'Thalas expressed its willingness to establish a long-term friendship with Wintertown, allowing for more exchanges. After these meetings, David left Azeroth and returned to Wintertown. Next, the Alliance must begin a thorough cleansing of the Eastern Kingdoms from the undead, particularly the capital of Lordaeron. This must be done as quickly as possible to allow Kali Amenethil to complete her coronation ceremony. This will be no easy task and will likely take considerable time. Even after the undead are completely eliminated, rebuilding the capital and preparing for the coronation ceremony will take time. Furthermore, Tyrion Fordring has been confirmed as regent of Lordaeron, assisting the newly crowned Queen Kali Amenethil in governing the Kingdom of Lordaeron. The regent's inauguration ceremony will be held concurrently with the Queen's coronation ceremony, also to be held after the capital of Lordaeron has been recaptured and repaired. It's still early, and we haven't even set a date, but let's make a note of this. After returning to Wintertown, David chatted with Floyd, Gareth Stanton, and Elias, asking how they'd been doing during his absence. He then summoned Eva and inquired about the specifics of Wintertown's recent situation. Eva's primary job now was to report in detail on the various minor incidents that had occurred in Wintertown. Wintertown wasn't experiencing any major events. The biggest incident was Gareth Stanton's military patrol, which had driven out some intruders by force. Farmers have already started planting this year. The weather was gradually warming, and the New Year's planting season had begun. Considering Wintertown's population had skyrocketed many times over last year, cultivating more farmland might be necessary to ensure food security. If possible, have Van Cleef send some men to help reclaim the wasteland. David thought for a moment and decided it would be best to discuss this with Van Cleef alone. Never mind, I'll talk to Edwin about this later. Okay. David then inquired about Anduin's situation. He learned that the young prince was no longer hounding the craftsman with endless questions. Instead, he had become absorbed in the various books Lore had brought him and had even taught himself English. It seemed that he wanted to gain more knowledge to resolve his doubts. After hearing this, David didn't intend to interfere in Anduin's affairs. He was actually curious about what kind of fruit Anduin would grow if he were allowed to live in Wintertown for a few years. After inquiring about the town's situation and explaining some light-related knowledge to Eva, she finally asked, "What are we going to do with the newcomers? First, build them accommodations, as per custom. We'll figure out the rest later." Eva was referring to the diplomat Jaina Proudmoore from Dalaran, Sylvanus Windrunner and her lieutenant, Liadrin, from Quel'Thalas, and Rhaenyra Mograine and her lieutenant, Sally Whitemane, from Lordaeron. Dalaran chose Jaina because she and David knew each other, and Jaina herself had requested it, so she was stationed in Winterfell as a diplomat. Furthermore, as the daughter of Alliance Admiral Dylan Proudmoore, Jaina could represent Kultiris, effectively acting as a spokesperson for both factions. Quel'Thalas chose Sylvanus because she was more familiar with David. Meanwhile, King Anasterion may have considered sending this highly decorated ranger general away, having already decided to recall his son, Keilthas, to Quel'Thalas and pass the throne to him. Sending Sylvanus away was intended to create more opportunities for his son to achieve success, such as the upcoming mission to wipe out the Scourge in the Eastern Kingdoms, which would fall to Keilthas. Had Sylvanus remained in Quel'Thalas, she, having led the High Elves against the Scourge, would have been the most suitable choice. Another consideration was maintaining a close relationship with the powerful David. While the old king had hinted at this intention, he might have been tempted to employ a honey trap. Finally, there were the diplomats sent by the Kingdom of Lordaeron, Alexandros Magraine's eldest son, Rhaenyra Mograine, and his adopted daughter, Sally Whitemane. David was stunned when he heard the two names, then realized it was likely Fordring's doing. Considering the infamous couple, who were still motivated and eager to prove themselves, David didn't refuse. Perhaps this decision could save many lives? Besides these diplomats and their lieutenants, they should have brought a large number of guards, servants, and other personnel with them, but David stopped them. "My Wintertown is still in its early stages of development and can't accommodate so many people." Since none of them were pampered, they agreed to go to Wintertown without guards and servants, and would consider adding more personnel after Wintertown was fully developed. Thus, Several diplomats representing their respective factions accompanied David to Wintertown. While David and Eva discussed the situation in Wintertown, several diplomats, led by Laura and Sharon, were taking a tour of the town. Is this the domain of Baron Glamorgan? Several representatives from various factions of Azeroth were surprised. They hadn't expected the Avatar of the Light's domain to be so pristine. Looking at the massive construction site, it was obvious construction had just begun. No wonder they said the domain was still under development and couldn't accommodate many people. However, with David Glamorgan's abilities, he could certainly have obtained a higher title and a better, more prosperous domain. Or was this so-called Kingdom of Tiran so powerful that even the Avatar of the Light was relegated to pioneering on the border? Laura didn't provide a detailed explanation, leaving the details to the imagination of the others. Raynor simply lamented that David could have chosen to give up this place and become the Grand Duke of Strathalem. It was the most prosperous city in the Kingdom of Lordaeron besides the capital. Even after the Scourge and the massacres by Arthas, the foundation was there. With a few years of careful governance, it would soon become a major city. Furthermore, David holds an incredibly formidable reputation within the Knights of the Silver Hand and the Church of the Light in Lordaeron. If he so desires, he could immediately become their new leader. If David expresses such a desire, the Silver Hand would be more than willing to storm Stormwind, bring Benedictus to David, and strongly recommend the current Archbishop of the Holy Light to relinquish this position. Regardless, David's prospects would be better if he chose to remain in Lordaeron. In contrast, Sylvanus and Jaina have more complex concerns. Sylvanus desires to learn more about David, specifically the reason for his power. Nearly being killed by Arthas and watching her comrades perish before the ravages of the Scourge have fueled her drive to become even stronger. Jaina, besides these inquiries, also wants to investigate this world. She particularly wants to understand what connects this world to Azeroth. As soon as they arrived, the two women who wielded arcane energy discovered the various restrictions and limitations placed on it by this world. They couldn't even freely mobilize the arcane energy they were so familiar with. What's going on with arcane energy in this world? Chapter 144, Dividing the Land to Win People's Hearts. The strange state of arcane energy distracted Sylvanus and Jaina briefly, and they only regained their composure after a complete tour of Wintertown. Meanwhile, Laura had summoned Peggy and was discussing accommodations with the Azerothian diplomats. For now, they were to choose a location of their choice, and Wintertown would provide assistance in building a wooden cabin as a temporary residence. Construction on a better home wouldn't begin until Wintertown's infrastructure was complete. Also, here are some books on learning the common language of Azeroth and the common language of Brunia, Laura said, handing them to the group. She had printed numerous copies of these language learning books and had a large collection stored in Wintertown, just for this situation. The Azerothian diplomats accepted the books and realized they had truly arrived in another world. During their earlier visit, they hadn't felt like they had left Azeroth at all. It felt like they had simply arrived in a remote village. Looking at the Bronian common language textbook in their hands, the group had varying reactions. Jaina thought it wasn't a big deal. For a mage, learning a new language was a simple matter. Sylvanus and Liandrin also thought it was nothing, just a matter of time. Sally Whitemane wasn't worried either, but Raynor looked troubled. Until your cabins are built, you can stay in the existing cabins. Laura could give up her cabin and return to Croft Manor to rest, or she could stay with David. Peggy could also share a cabin with Sharon. Mark could also offer his cabin and spend the night at the Mars base. The Azeroth delegation received no special hospitality on their first day in Wintertown. They even had dinner, like everyone else in Wintertown, in the mess hall. Baron David Glamorgan had been their only direct guide upon their arrival, but they hadn't even seen David since arriving. According to Laura, David was currently working on some matters, and after everyone rested for the night, he'd probably be done by tomorrow. Everyone expressed their understanding. Besides, they didn't have anything urgent to ask David right now, and preferred the present moment, free to wander around and explore. However, Sylvanus and Liandrin didn't wander around. They both noticed a few strange looks from people in Wintertown. Don't elves exist in this world? Liandrin thought the people there had never seen elves, hence the strange gazes. But Sylvanus felt differently. Some people's eyes are filled with wariness, some even hostile. Liandrin, don't act alone for the time being. Yes, my lord, if possible. Sylvanus wanted to take advantage of the night to scout the situation. If she could gather some information, all the better. However, The unusual arcane energy made her hesitant to act rashly. She had to at least understand the situation and ensure her combat power was in good condition before considering other matters. For now, it was best to rest. The newcomers were all quite obedient, but the elders of Wintertown were not so quiet. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Edwin Van Cleef reported his recent observations to David. Only one person, David had asked Van Cleef to conduct surveillance and investigation when he brought Gareth Stanton and the others to Wintertown. After observing the former Storm Kingdom MI7 intelligence officer, he had determined who the spy from the Kingdom of Tiran was. Yes, only one, Edwin Van Cleef thought for a moment. Then spoke his mind. "And, if I'm not mistaken, this spy was planted here deliberately by that Gareth Stanton." "You mean, is there something wrong with Gareth Stanton?" "No, there isn't anything wrong with him." Van Cleef could be certain of this because Gareth Stanton was one of his key targets, and from his observations, he knew the knight was absolutely loyal to David. If there was something wrong, he wouldn't have just one spy under his command. "Oh, I see what you mean. These 10 soldiers were handpicked by Gareth Stanton himself, meaning the knight had deliberately eliminated all but one of his spy agents. A single spy under his eye could be cleaned off whenever necessary, posing no significant threat. The fact that they hadn't cleaned out all of them was probably to fulfill His Majesty's mission. So, was Gareth Stanton truly loyal to him? Was he truly loyal enough? That's quite unexpected. After pondering for a few seconds, David asked Van Cleef, "Do you have any suggestions?" "Ignore it." "Well, let's do as you say." It was just one spy, merely helping Abelson observe Wintertown. There was no need to specifically eliminate him. It would appear as if he was up to something sinister, so he could just leave him there. Besides, keeping this spy there might serve another purpose. As Wintertown developed, more people would arrive sooner or later, and their backgrounds wouldn't be easy to investigate. Leaving this spy there might lead to more fish. As for Gareth Stanton, did he seem to be able to give him more trust? There was no rush. As long as Gareth demonstrated sufficient ability, David wouldn't hesitate to reward him. By the way, Wintertown's population has increased significantly now. I'm worried that relying solely on the existing farmland won't be enough to produce enough food. He casually mentioned to Van Cleef the idea of assigning some people to cultivate the farmland. According to Wintertown's current laws, the farmland cultivated by these artisans would also become their personal property. Even if they don't want to become farmers themselves, they can hire indentured farmers to cultivate their own land. David felt that if this was handled well, these artisans would be fully integrated into Wintertown and feel it was their true home. With a little work, every artisan could get their own piece of land. Van Cleef, who had been calm until then, was truly moved. He hadn't expected David to offer such a generous benefit to the artisans. Although David had promised him that he would strive to ensure a stable life for the artisans, Van Cleef hadn't expected David to offer such a large piece of the pie. If everyone had their own piece of farmland, even if it wasn't large, it would provide the most basic security. Once Wintertown's infrastructure was established and everyone built their own houses, combined with their already acquired skills, good times would truly arrive. "My lord, I think it would be best if you announced this to the artisans yourself." Since David was willing to keep his promise, Van Cleef was naturally willing to provide any assistance he could, such as helping David maintain his status as Baron of Glamorgan and Lord of Wintertown. "Well, tomorrow morning, before work begins. I'll announce it when the craftsmen gather at the site after breakfast." Van Cleef nodded his approval and left. By then, it was already dark. David, watching Laura enter, inquired about the Azareth delegation. "It's all arranged," Laura said, her hands on her hips as she stood before David. A thought struck her. "Speaking of which, since we're establishing formal diplomatic relations, do we also need to have someone stationed there permanently?" "I'll have Tyrion do that." If those nations needed to contact him regarding anything important, they could simply contact Fordring directly. Even if he had Mark, Sharon, and the others remain in Azareth, David wouldn't be able to travel directly to Azareth if they contacted him. Ultimately, Fordring would still have to be notified, so contacting him directly was the most efficient method. "What? You want to represent Wintertown and stay in Azareth permanently? That world seems to have many interesting places to explore." After 2 seconds of silence for the various ancient tombs, ruins, dungeons and other places in Azareth, David symbolically advised, "Azareth is too dangerous. If you are not careful, the Zerg, old gods, guardians and so on will be released. I think you should explore somewhere else." When he said this, David really thought of a suitable place. I think lion is good. Killing zombies, parasites and so on is not dangerous at all. It can relieve your emotions very well. I want to find a place with historical traces, not just a place where I want to kill people to vent my anger. Laura felt a little lacking in confidence as she spoke. She had explored ancient ruins several times and had always been killing people randomly. Ahem. In short, I have no interest in going to Lion's World to kill zombies or something. Oh, right, what? I didn't have time to ask before. Why did you suddenly become so powerful? Laura had wanted to ask for a long time, and only got the chance now. The huge holy light frightened me. It's just a bonus from the field under special circumstances. David waved his hand, indicating that he couldn't release such a huge amount of holy light under normal circumstances. But, I do get a lot of benefits from it. What benefits? Laura thought about it. Any benefits related to holy light seemed to be the so-called light forging. But David didn't look like he was light forged. Could it be that you have become a holy light creature, improved physical fitness, more holy light in my body, and this, David explained as he completed his transformation, allowing people to see his Cybertron body for the first time. Chapter 145, The Body of Cybertron. David's trip to Azeroth had strengthened his physical fitness and his holy light, but none of that was as surprising as his Cybertronian form. Because it was so interesting. Before today, David hadn't thoroughly researched this ability, but now that Laura wanted to see it, they could explore together. David only knew that he could transform into Cybertronian mode. This silicon-based life form state significantly increased his strength and resilience, enhanced his thinking, and allowed him to output holy light energy with even greater ferocity. For example, the holy light field he used in Azeroth required his Cybertronian form. If David used it in his normal form, his body would either collapse from the immense energy output, or he would be transformed into a pure holy light creature under the onslaught of holy light, and at worst, light forged. Without the added bonus of Azeroth, David found this mode incredibly energy intensive, requiring him to switch to low power mode if he wanted to maintain it for extended periods. Just like the Autobots and Decepticons, now deprived of their homeworld of Cybertron and without a stable energy supply, the two factions of Cybertronians typically operate in a low power mode. In this mode, many of their abilities, such as their universal energy shields, are unavailable. Alternatively, they can simply amplify their holy light, which, with a sufficient energy supply, allows them to maintain this mode for extended periods. That's not a problem, is it? You won't be in this state forever. It's certainly not a problem. David rarely needed to engage in combat, and the occasional battles he did face were handled by his increasingly powerful holy light and a growing array of weaponry. The occasional need to use his Cybertronian body was truly rare. Laura felt around, finding nothing unusual. David, still David, looked like David. I still don't see what's so special about this state. Also, what exactly do you mean by the special field bonus? David was actually observing himself. He still had a lot to learn about this state. As for Laura's persistent question, he casually explained, you should know that Azeroth is a planet capable of giving birth to titans, right? Laura nodded. This was considered a basic premise within the Warcraft universe. Azeroth is a titan that hasn't truly awakened yet. The lore states that once awakened, Azeroth will be the most powerful titan. So it's not that I've become stronger, it's that Azeroth is already strong. Laura tilted her head, unsatisfied with David's answer. What does Azeroth's strength have to do with you? I just gained some authority from Azeroth. To put it bluntly, it was Azeroth, not David, who was harnessing the power. In fact, David was only able to wield that level of power because he was so weak. Oh, I see. It's like you've borrowed Azeroth's authority account, allowing you to wield power far beyond your natural capabilities. Pretty much. With her doubts resolved, Laura began to study the Cybertronian body with David intently. They soon discovered that David could change his appearance while in this mode. A familiar transformation sound echoed, and David transformed from a human to robot. Perhaps because he had no template, the robot he transformed into looked incredibly ugly. Why does it look like C-3PO, or even a degraded version? David was speechless at his appearance. He wasn't Sheldon. So why did he have to look like a robot? He transformed again in front of the mirror, returning to his human form. He found that in Cybertronian form, he looked a bit like the Decepticon Hermit Warrior from the second Transformers movie. He had both a machine and a human form. They looked like humans, but were still silicon-based life forms, and he could switch between them freely. Then, he discovered that his body could be adjusted. Huh? This is interesting. Seeing David adjusting his appearance in the mirror, Laura, who had initially lost interest, finally became interested and started pointing and commenting. He even asked David to transform into robot form first. After a long period of adjustment, a familiar robot skeleton appeared before Laura. Back. David gave a thumbs up, then quickly ignored Laura's protests and abandoned the transformation. It's too ugly. After a long period of adjusting himself, he finally sculpted a mechanical form that satisfied him. He copied the design of Optimus Prime, the knight who would appear in the fourth Transformers film, but instead of the blue and red color scheme, he chose black. As for whether Optimus Prime's design would clash with David's in the future, David would strongly recommend that Prime choose the classic G1 look. After setting the Black Knight Optimus Prime design as the default mechanical form, David discovered another feature of the Cybertronium body. While it was possible to adjust various positions based on individual preferences, this process was relatively tedious and time-consuming. Therefore, once the appearance was determined, it could be set as a fixed template. The next time you transformed, you could simply select this template for a quick transformation. Currently, David could save one mechanical template and one human template. After switching back and forth between mechanical and human forms, David finally stopped in human form. What? Enough. Laura watched with initial interest, but the novelty quickly wore off, and David suddenly dealt her a critical blow. You've seen the Transformers movies, right? I rewatched them after the ambulance arrived. Then remember the Decepticon in Transformers 2 who disguised himself as the protagonist's classmate? Yes. Why? Seeing Laura's look of disgust, David was about to stop talking, only to be met with a sudden, devastating blow from Laura. What are you waiting for? Let me see. That night, the two of them conducted a detailed and in-depth study of Cybertransform. It was David's first experience with Laura's thirst for knowledge, her imagination far surpassing his own. He felt completely outmatched. However, seeing Laura sprawled out in a deep sleep, showing no signs of waking, a surge of pride welled up in his heart. He dressed, washed up, and headed out the door refreshed. Good morning, Baron. Good morning, Elias. As always, Elias Parker would be up earlier than David, waiting at the door for the Lord to appear. Baron, what would you like to eat today? Elias, in addition to his duties as ceremonial officer, also took on the part-time duties of personal butler and servant, helping David quickly adjust to his noble status and complete his duties. A normal breakfast will do. Understood, sir. After a pause, Elias inquired, do you need an extra portion? No. David understood Elias was asking about Laura, as he didn't think Laura would be up before evening. Elias, understanding, went to get breakfast and, after watching the Baron finish his breakfast, accompanied him to the North construction site for a speech. Edwin Van Cleef had already gathered the artisans, including those bound for the mines to the north. The artisans had no idea what was going on, only that it concerned their future. It wasn't until David arrived and announced a farmland plan that they understood what was going on. Really? Once we reclaim the land, it'll belong to us. Aren't those farmers in town indentured farmers? If they could own their own farmland after reclaiming it, why are they still working for the Lord and Lady Samantha? Who knows? Maybe they already had a contract. Are you going to reclaim the wasteland? Of course, wouldn't you? This is like giving you land for free. Don't you want it? Yes, why not? I'm not that stupid. The artisans were buzzing with discussion, some even impatient, eager to ask for permission from Foreman Van Cleef to leave the site and reclaim the land. Fortunately, David's next words calmly agitated artisans. He said that Edwin Van Cleef would arrange suitable free time for everyone, ensuring that everyone had time to reclaim their own land. Of course, a dedicated group could also be assigned to reclaim the land, and the farmland would be divided equally among all the artisans. The specific option was up to the artisans to discuss. After finishing his explanation, David left the construction site, but he lingered for a moment, watching the artisans' animated discussion. He knew his plan to divide the land was working well. After all, before today, the artisans had enjoyed relatively safe housing and no longer had to worry about food, but it was still a far cry from a truly good life. Having been cheated by Stormwind once before, they worried that their hard work wouldn't pay them enough. This worry would only intensify over time. If not properly addressed, it could lead to violent conflict. David's offering of tangible benefits to the artisans completely eliminated this potential threat. The artisans continued to work with high energy and dedication, perhaps even harder than before, because this time they were truly working for themselves. Seeing the motivated artisans, David happily prepared to go on his daily rounds. Unexpectedly, as he turned, he saw Jaina approaching. "Good morning, Lord Glamorgan. I have some questions about magic that I'd like to ask you. I heard you guys like to release everything all at once. I'll see how everyone reacts. If you like it, I'll keep it that way in the future." 3 chapters today. Chapter 146, Recruiting New Soldiers. Magic. David looked at Jaina, a bit bewildered. "Proudmoore mage? Just call me Jaina, you can call me David. I don't know much about magic, I'm not a mage, I know, grah." David, Jaina chose her words carefully, explaining her true meaning. "I want to ask about the specifics of this world's spellcasters." Hearing that Jaina wanted to ask about this, David could only awkwardly explain that he didn't know much about this world's spellcasters and had never met a mage from this world. This, Jaina had clearly misunderstood. She had assumed that arcane spellcasters in this world were extremely rare, something even David wouldn't have the chance to encounter. David thought for a moment and suggested that Jaina learn the Bronian tongue as quickly as possible. "There's an alchemist in Wintertown named Pierre Newton. Before I invited him to serve as my personal advisor, he traveled the Bronian continent for many years and is well versed in many matters." Jaina nodded. Although she didn't get an answer from David, at least she had someone to ask. The next question was the Bronian tongue, which wasn't a problem for her at all. She could learn it in a few days, and at most, speaking it would require a few more days of practice. Indeed, after just a few days, Jaina could speak Bronian tongue fluently, with a Tiran accent. Sylvanus and Liandrin could also communicate in Bronian tongue without any problems. Sally Whitemane, though with some difficulty, could also communicate in Bronian tongue. Only Ronair Mograine was still learning. Even Rainer, the slowest learner, was learning new knowledge at a rate far exceeding the average person, prompting David to sigh again. They're all talented, after all, they were all well-known figures in Azarath, so such performance wasn't surprising. Seeing this, David once again considered traveling to Azarath to recruit some new followers. With his current reputation and fame, he figured it would be easy to recruit familiar figures. Finally reassembling his thoughts, David looked at Gareth Stanton and Floyd, the 2 personal guard knights before him, and expressed surprise that they had both come to him at the same time. "What's the matter, sir? Wintertown's territory is quite large, and with only 10 soldiers, it's difficult to cover it all." So, David looked at Gareth Stanton. He already knew what the knight was going to say. "You're looking for new recruits?" "Yes, are you here for that, too?" David glanced at Floyd. The 2 men usually split up their duties and rarely appeared in his presence together. "Yes, sir." 10 soldiers are indeed too few. Floyd glanced at the nearby construction site, envious of the artisans. Although everyone in town is busy with work and hasn't caused any trouble, people from other places have recently begun arriving near Wintertown. David understood Floyd's meaning. With more and more outsiders arriving in Wintertown, public security would likely deteriorate. These newcomers wouldn't be as honest as the indentured farmers and artisans. It wasn't that Floyd was biased, but in this era, those who ventured far from home to pursue their careers were more or less unruly. If used well, these individuals could be pioneers. If not, they could become a source of trouble. "How many soldiers are you planning to recruit?" "Well," Gareth Stanton and Floyd exchanged a glance, and finally Floyd asked, "That depends on what kind of soldiers you're looking for." "Sir, what do you mean?" Seeing that the Baron genuinely didn't understand, the 2 knights finally realized that they weren't pledging allegiance to nobles from established families, but rather to young men of commoner origin. It wasn't surprising they didn't understand the difference. Floyd immediately explained it to David. Currently, the soldiers of the Kingdom of Tiran are divided into several categories. Formal knight orders, undoubtedly the best in terms of combat power, status, and treatment. The members of the Tiran Knights are primarily knights or those diligently training to become knights. By their status, the Tiran Knights are all nobles. Naturally, their weapons, armor, and salaries are the best. Slightly below that are the knight orders under the command of several great lords. The Iron Tree Knights of Iron Tree Castle are a prime example. These orders are primarily commanded by noble knights, and their soldiers are carefully selected elite cavalry. Their equipment, treatment, and combat effectiveness are also exceptional. Next up are the professional soldiers. These soldiers are fully supported and paid by their lords, with their food, lodging, and equipment all provided by their lords. They are currently the mainstay of the Tiran Kingdom's military. The soldiers David had previously encountered at the northern outpost, as well as the 10 soldiers currently stationed in Wintertown, all fall into this category. While the training of these professional soldiers isn't as demanding as that of cavalry, it's still a significant expense. Weapons, armor, training equipment, and lodging all come from the lord's pockets. Smaller lords simply can't afford to maintain many such professional soldiers. Therefore, there's a lower level of semi-professional soldiers, the militia. Militia don't make their living as soldiers, they have their own main occupations, and most are farmers. They primarily cultivate the land, but they are required to regularly participate in military training and take part in military operations. Generally, lords offer tax reductions as a benefit to ensure farmers' willingness to volunteer for the militia. In terms of cost, the cost of training a small group of professional soldiers is enough to train hundreds of militiamen, Floyd said, noting the significant disparity in costs between the two groups. Hearing this, David finally understood why the two knights had come to him. The two knights were unsure if Wintertown could support more professional soldiers. Furthermore, the two royal guards were actually reminding David of something. These 10 professional soldiers had come to Wintertown and were working diligently. Sir, isn't it time to pay them? Coming to his senses, David rubbed his temples speechlessly. The town is currently centralizing its resources. If you hadn't told me, I'd have forgotten these soldiers needed extra pay. He then asked how much he should pay the 10 soldiers. Upon hearing the figure, he glanced at Eva beside him. Seeing her nod, he breathed a sigh of relief. Not bad, he could afford to pay these soldiers. When Lord Sutton Stewart hosted a party, he had received many gifts. He had exchanged some of the duplicate and useless gifts for coins along the way and brought them back. Since Wintertown was still undergoing unified planning, the coins had simply sat there. As for whether to recruit professional soldiers or train militia directly, David felt it would be better to prioritize professional soldiers. As for the militia, it would be better to wait until Wintertown was built and the artisans had some free time before training. Farmers and artisans alike were currently overwhelmed with the work, leaving them with little time or energy for military training. Furthermore, Wintertown was still in the period of centralized resource allocation, with virtually no taxes to collect. Weapons, armor, food, lodging, and training facilities, right, besides salaries, these were the main reasons limiting the number of professional soldiers. David was thankful that he could easily secure these. Laura and Fording could help him secure a large supply. As for salaries, if that wasn't enough, he could simply distribute supplies, jewelry, and the like, and let the soldiers exchange them for cash. So, David wasn't a pauper lord. In fact, thanks to his recent reputation gains in Nazareth, he might even be wealthier than he imagined. Yes, a simple framework for the barracks and training grounds could be constructed first, but weapons and armor. Floyd and Gareth Stanton both knew that Will Turner, the blacksmith in Wintertown, was quite skilled. The weapons and armor he crafted were sufficient for Wintertown's needs for now. Besides, sir, to what level of training do you desire these soldiers? David, who had thought the problem was solved, realized after hearing Floyd's question that there were still further expenses. If your lord simply wishes to train ordinary professional soldiers, as long as they have enough food, that will be enough. Floyd, knowing his lord didn't understand anything, didn't keep him in suspense and explained directly. If your lord wishes these soldiers to be strong enough to reach the level of the kingdom's frontline troops, then the assistance of Mr. Cordell and Mr. Newton will be required. What about the pharmacist and alchemist? David suddenly understood why Elias had so strongly advised him to recruit all the men before leaving the Tiran royal city. Just train them according to the standards you had when you were in the Knights of Tiran. After hearing David's answer, the expressions of Floyd and Gareth Stanton were as wonderful as they could be. That's the standard for training knights. It's not something you can achieve by just being willing to spend money. In addition to having extremely high requirements on one's own qualities, it also requires a lot of resources. One of the main reasons why Floyd was able to train new knights in the Knights of Tiran was that the soldiers of the Knights of Tiran were young people from noble families. In addition to the resources provided by the knights, their families could also provide various support. But if you do this in Wintertown, then Lord David will have to pay for it himself. I know what you are thinking. Prepare according to this standard first. If you encounter any problems that are difficult to solve, come to me, then, my lord, How many new recruits will you recruit this time? 50. Chapter 147, Opening Up a Medicinal Field. 50 new recruits was far too many. Wintertown currently had only about 400 men. Floyd and Gareth Stanton believed that 20 more would be sufficient. If these 20 recruits could all complete their training and become full-fledged soldiers, combined with the original 10 soldiers, they would form 3 squads, more than enough to ensure Wintertown's safety and even allow for adequate rest. I'll leave these matters entirely to you. Regarding the temporary barracks, you can simply contact Edwin. David didn't participate in the specific matters, not to mention that he didn't know how to train soldiers. Furthermore, from their previous conversation, he had already discovered that this world seemed to have some unique methods for training soldiers, and he was very curious about this. As the 2 Royal Guard Knights went about their respective duties, one on their daily patrol for the day, the other preparing for the recruitment, David glanced at Eva beside him and inquired about the pharmacist, Cordell. If Floyd hadn't mentioned the pharmacist, he would have almost forgotten he even existed in the town. What's that pharmacist, Cordell, up to lately, Mr. Cordell's been hanging around Wintertown, apparently observing the land. Yes, Mr. Cordell came to me yesterday and said he wants to cultivate a medicinal herb field south of the village. Even if David hadn't asked, Eva would have reported it to David. He must have been looking for a suitable location. Oh, I see. When Cordell arrived in Wintertown, the weather was still cold, not ideal for growing medicinal herbs. Furthermore, Cordell wasn't familiar with Wintertown's land and climate, so he needed to observe for a while, hence the lack of activity. He must have finished his survey and officially begun his work by now. You can handle this kind of thing directly. Eva simply smiled sweetly and moved on to the next matter. Miss Sylvanus came to me a while ago and asked me something. What did she ask you about? About the elves? Elves? Oh, David understood why Sylvanus had asked Eva about the elves. Perhaps she had noticed that some people in Wintertown were looking at her and Liandrin with skepticism. Fortunately, most of Wintertown's current residents were artisans from Stormwind Kingdom, with only a handful of farmers from Iron Tree Keep. Others, such as Floyd, Gareth Stanton, Elias, and Apothecary Cordell, all came from Tiran Royal City. Iron Tree Keep and the elves had a very poor relationship, but those in Tiran Royal City, though they knew a little about the situation, didn't share the same hostility towards the elves as the people of Iron Tree Keep. If Floyd and the others were from Iron Tree Keep, they would have asked him about Sylvanus's situation long ago. After taking care of some trivial matters for a while, David, along with Eva and Elias, found Cordell, who was wandering south of Wintertown. Sir, having accepted Lord Glamorgan's recruitment, Cordell, like Gareth Stanton and Floyd, was technically a subordinate loyal to David. Their subordinate relationship was even closer than that of Elias Parker, who was standing beside him. Elias was sent to David by the Kingdom of Tiran. He wasn't one of David's subordinates, he was loyal to the Tiran royal family. However, for some reason, David had always treated the pharmacist coldly since arriving in Wintertown, until today, when they finally had a private conversation. Mr. Cordell, just call me Cordell, sir, Cordell said respectfully, his demeanor humble. I heard you were planning to cultivate a medicinal herb field. Yes, sir, Cordell explained briefly. As an apothecary, he needed a source of medicinal herbs, and if he was in the capital, he wouldn't have to worry about running out of them. However, upon arriving in Wintertown, he had no choice but to cultivate medicinal herbs himself. If he couldn't grow enough, he would have to go to the nearby metropolis, Iron Tree Keep, to purchase them and stockpile sufficient supplies. Only in this way could he concoct various potions and help the Baron with his various medical needs, and this need wasn't limited to Baron Glamorgan's own. When widespread illnesses arose within the territory, the apothecary serving the Lord was required to offer solutions and advice. Cultivate land nearby. Yes, sir, David looked around. This place was south of Wintertown, and Will's blacksmith shop was directly north, but a distance away. The location made it a bit far from Wintertown. Isn't it a bit far from town? David didn't think the apothecary was playing tricks. He had followed him to such a remote place as Wintertown, and living alone outside the town wouldn't be of any practical benefit to him. It's mainly to avoid the busiest part of town. After Cordell's explanation, David understood why the apothecary had deliberately left room for development, allowing him to cultivate herbal medicine fields as far out as possible. If that's the reason, this place is even less suitable. It's better to go north, David advised Cordell against cultivating herbal medicine fields south of town. This might become a residential area for new residents, but there's construction going on in the north, right? Cordell had gone south because the north of town was a large construction site. The only area near the Winter River that hadn't been ravaged by the craftsmen, but he couldn't cultivate herbal medicine fields there, it was too close to the river. The edge of the winter forest should also be suitable. David pointed to the open space on the south side of the winter forest, west of the simple railway track that connected the mine to the construction site. Yes, that's a good place. Cordell thought about it and decided to cultivate herbal medicine fields there. Sir, I heard from Knight Stanton that a new village is starting to be built nearby. Yes, David looked at Cordell, curious about what the apothecary was trying to say. In that case, a caravan will arrive in Wintertown soon, so, my lord, I may need to purchase a large amount of medicinal herbs from the caravan. David finally understood what Cordell was trying to say. He had the same reason as the two knights, money. He also remembered that he had never paid Cordell either. However, Cordell wasn't asking for wages, but rather for work expenses. In theory, the funds for purchasing medicinal herbs were provided by the Lord, so the medicines prepared by the pharmacist were the Lord's property. In addition to receiving their due wages, the pharmacist's additional income mainly came from the Lord's rewards, and they didn't need to rely on selling medicine to make a living. You will withdraw some funds from Eva later. If it's not enough, you can ask Eva for more. I understand, my lord. After so long, these people from the capital had realized that the person who truly ran Wintertown was actually the young woman Eva McKenna. She was the chief steward of Wintertown and the chief assistant to the Baron of Glamorgan. But no one underestimated this beautiful woman, for Eva performed her job perfectly. Furthermore, after observing her, everyone realized that this Eva McKenna seemed, probably, not to be that kind of relationship with Lord Glamorgan. Ahem, Your Excellency. Thinking of this, Cordell suddenly remembered something important. He leaned over to David and whispered, although Your Excellency is in good health and full of energy, you should exercise moderation. While no one was paying attention, Cordell secretly handed David a bottle. David took the small bottle, confused, and only then realized what Cordell meant. He sighed inwardly. The soundproofing in his new home couldn't be this bad anymore. He put the bottle away and walked back with Eva and Elias, who pretended to have seen and heard nothing. After receiving permission, Cordell headed directly north of the town to locate the medicinal field. He followed a baron's example, marking the area with a sign to prevent any delays and potential damage from the craftsmen. David returned to the table in front of his cabin. With a rising temperature, he preferred to work here. Even if there was nothing to do, simply sitting and taking in the scenery was a delight. Before he could even sit down, he spotted several people, led by Gareth Stanton, approaching Wintertown from a distance. Judging by their attire, they looked like ordinary civilians. He stood by the wooden table and waited until Gareth Stanton and his men arrived. Sir, these are people who wish to settle in Wintertown, Gareth Stanton explained in a single sentence. David nodded and turned his attention to the civilians. There were 4 of them, 3 in their early 20s, and 1 in his late 20s. All were young men. Welcome to Wintertown. David examined the young men carefully. They all looked thin and pale. But David didn't despise them. He believed that with a few days' rest, they would soon recover and contribute to the development of Wintertown. Ever since King Abelson had helped David promote Wintertown nationwide, David had hoped that people from all over the country would come to him. He had heard that people had been arriving in the northern plains, but few had come to Wintertown. To be exact, only one person had come so far. Only today, he finally saw more civilians wanting to settle in Wintertown. Perhaps this was the beginning of a population boom? As David imagined a bright future, Elias beside him introduced David to the group. You are standing before you, the Lord of Wintertown, Baron David Glamorgan. He then extended his welcome. Wintertown is delighted to welcome you. With hard work, you will achieve anything you desire. Chapter 148 Friction. Eva asked if any of the new arrivals were craftsmen. Upon learning that the 4 were ordinary farmers, Gareth Stanton led them to the mess hall, where they had a meal and then found shelter. The temperature had just risen, and with Wintertown having recently announced a new round of reclamation this year, these new farmers were perfectly placed for this round. As long as they rested well for a few days in Wintertown and got back into top shape, they could join the new reclamation effort and soon have their own farmland. Gareth told them this news while they were eating, and they were all excited. They had overcome so many obstacles to come to Wintertown for this very reason. Their excitement at the realization that they were about to receive their land was so intense that they didn't even hear what he said next. It was only when Gareth Stanton repeated it that they realized they didn't even have to worry about food and lodging for the time being. Wintertown would provide for all residents. There's such a good thing. Several people were stunned. They had never imagined that Wintertown would provide food and shelter. They had initially thought they would need to solve their own accommodation problem first. Before arriving in Wintertown, they had discussed building a wooden house together, where the four of them would live together for 2 years while cultivating their farmland. To meet their daily needs, they might even hire some odd jobs or become temporary indentured farmers, just to ensure they had food. Once they had cultivated their own farmland, they would borrow seeds from the Lord of Wintertown and plant their crops. Even if most of the first year's harvest went to repay their debts, as long as they had enough food left to survive, their lives would gradually improve. After all, owning the farmland meant they would own most of the crops, and taxes in newly established towns were generally lower, meaning they could keep more of the harvest. But they never expected that the treatment in Wintertown would be even better than they expected. Not only were they provided with shelter and food, but even seed for the crops didn't require loans. The Lord would provide the seeds needed by the farmers who reclaimed their land. Several people were trembling with excitement, filled with hope for the future. David, too, was filled with hope, hoping to see more people settle in Wintertown in the future. David was so happy that he'd been grinning for most of the day. By the time dinner came, he felt his cheeks were a little stiff. Laura sat across from David, looking at his smirk all day, speechless and amused. After kicking David under the table a few times, she gently rubbed his calf with the back of her foot. David looked up and saw Laura, seemingly calm and collected, chatting with Sylvanus next to them. They seemed to be discussing a trip to Winterwood together the next day. She still hadn't given up on the idea of catching a northern giant wolf as a pet. After living in Wintertown for a while, Sylvanus had gained a good understanding of the town, which hadn't yet been fully built, and was indeed curious about the places beyond. She happily accepted Laura's invitation, eager to test her true abilities. Though their encounters were brief, Sylvanus knew Laura's primary weapon was the bow. Her fighting style was similar to that of a ranger, and Laura was also a light wielder. The light wielder, a class unheard of in Nazareth, intrigued Sylvanus. After discovering that Baron David Glamorgan, the man she most wanted to learn more about, also enjoyed practicing archery and firearms, she began to suspect he might also be a light wielder and ranger. Could this be a specialty of Winterfell? With this thought in mind, Sylvanus prepared to learn more. Perhaps because he was chatting with Sylvanus too enthusiastically, David soon felt a movement in his calf stop, even retracting. While appearing calm, he was taking the initiative. David had a measured approach, not resorting to his Cybertronian form to conjure up some bizarre feats to provoke Laura. David took a big bite of his fried egg and listened to the various conversations around the long table. He also took advantage of the time spent together at dinner to gain a clearer understanding of everyone's situation. Besides Gina's trip to Pierre Newton, the old alchemist had also become friends with Leonard, Sheldon, and the others. The old alchemist discovered that besides the ambulance, there were many people in Wintertown with whom he could discuss atoms, protons, and electrons. This delighted him greatly, and he was in a state of high excitement every day, his smile even brighter than David's. Leonard and the others were also delighted, for they saw in the old alchemist an opportunity to master mystical powers. Now Leonard frequented Wintertown whenever he had time, and Sheldon, Howard, and Raj also visited whenever they had free time. As for Penny, Penny had also made friends. She had befriended Liadrin, who had recently arrived in Wintertown. The two had met simply because Penny was curious about Liadrin's clothing. Although the two initially couldn't even speak the same language, Penny, with her strong communication skills and extensive library of fashion magazines, successfully piqued Liadrin's interest. Liadrin, a high elf priestess equally passionate about beautiful clothes, had even taught herself English to facilitate communication. As they chatted about clothing, Penny expressed her desire to open a clothing store in Winterfell if she couldn't make it in Los Angeles. She figured she could find success by copying some of the styles from Earth. If people here shared Liadrin's love for beautiful clothes, maybe I could open a clothing store in Winterfell, and then an online store in Los Angeles, selling high elf clothing and unique accessories. I think a lot of people would buy them, As Penny spoke, she glanced at Leonard and his group, who were sitting nearby. She remembered Leonard mentioning a large number of World of Warcraft players. Elsewhere, Leon and Krauser were consulting Sharon about arcane energy. Only then did David realize that Krauser and Leon were planning to use the same method Sharon had used to absorb arcane energy into their bodies. Krauser had also begun studying and practicing the hunter's skills according to the manual. After reviewing the various knowledge, he concluded that the hunter's skills were best suited for him. Leon was simply joining in the fun. He had no particular desire to learn anything. Hearing Leon's words, David offered a suggestion. You might consider learning two-handed swordsmanship. What's wrong? David glanced at Eva, who was sitting next to Laura. Are you feeling unwell? No, nothing. Hearing Eva's response, and Leon's complaints about David's suggestion being terrible, David, unconvinced, continued to argue with Leon. Trying to prove his own suggestion was a good one. Believe me, Leon, you're born to wield a two-handed greatsword. Once you learn two-handed swordsmanship, you'll realize you were born for it. Leon felt increasingly convinced that David was making a joke of him. What did it mean to be born for two-handed swordsmanship? How could he not know he had such a strange attribute? Besides the two-handed sword, you need to practice dual pistols. Dual pistols, that's right, use two pistols at the same time. David gestured with his hands, shooting two pistols. When the monsters are far away, use the two pistols, and when they're close, draw the two-handed swords. Trust me, you'll become the most stunning bioweapon buster. Sounds like a character from an action movie. Leon glanced at the people around him, noticing the odd expressions on Leonard and Sheldon's faces. He immediately realized he was right. But if I could really become a bioweapon buster, I wouldn't mind dressing up like that. Having experienced the Raccoon City incident, Leon had a deep aversion to bioweapons. As long as he could truly eliminate those bioweapons, he would accept even more outlandish costumes, not to mention an action movie character. That goal isn't difficult to achieve, I believe it. After arriving in Wintertown, he witnessed more and more miraculous events, witnessed mysterious powers like the arcane and the holy light, and even met elves from other worlds. Leon believed that the troubles of his own world were nothing to those here. Especially since not long ago, this Baron David Glamorgan had helped a resident of Wintertown, supposedly from the early days of its founding, to resolve an even more terrifying undead crisis on his world, a terrifying threat that had swept across half the continent. And in Azeroth, where mystical powers abound, the biochemical virus of his own world paled in comparison. With this realization, Leon was filled with hope for his future, and suddenly, inexplicably, he felt a certain anticipation for David's mention of two-handed swords and dual pistols. After finishing dinner, Leon said goodbye and returned to his own world. His vacation was almost over. Leon's departure was a signal for everyone to leave the long table one after another. Some returned to their own worlds, some to their cabins to rest, and some to attend to other matters. Laura, for example, rose with Sylvanus to prepare for tomorrow's trip to Winterwood. Soon, David and Eva were the only ones left at the long table. As David watched Laura walk away, he was suddenly puzzled. Laura was gone, so whose leg did I keep rubbing against for so long, and whose leg was still there? Today is also the third update. Seeing how hard I work, wouldn't you guys show some appreciation? Like, call your friends, or sign up a few hundred accounts to subscribe? Chapter 149 Lineforged Vibranium Cybertron Body. The situation was awkward. David didn't know whether to continue or quickly withdraw his foot. Eva slowly ate the crumbs from her plate, her mind already in a tizzy. He kicked me twice earlier. Did he mean I should come back at 2 o'clock? Would that be inappropriate? Should I dress up? Maybe I should ask Sharon to borrow a scented orb. As everyone left, Eva quickly realized she was overthinking it and hurried off, leaving David alone at the long table, enjoying the refreshing evening breeze. The night passed in silence. David, having risen normally, went about his daily business, with Eva helping him as usual. The only change was a new companion. Prince Anduin Rin, alias Taupe, had read some of the books Laura had brought to Winterfell and carefully observed Baron David of Glamorgan's management methods. He decided to learn how to manage and develop his domain from him. After comparing his knowledge of Stormwind Kingdom, the current state of Wintertown, and the performance of its artisans with the information he'd read, he concluded that Baron David Glamorgan was a formidable lord. If he could observe and learn from him up close how this lord governed Wintertown, he'd likely learn a great deal. So, you want to learn from me? Yes, Anduin said, not hiding his feelings. He approached David directly, offering to become his student. Forget about the teacher-student thing. If you want to observe my daily work, feel free to come anytime. His work wasn't anything shameful, so if Anduin wanted to observe, he could do so. It wouldn't affect him in any way. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity, Baron Glamorgan. Although David acted nonchalant, having grown up in the palace and been educated in court etiquette, Anduin gave David due respect and thanked him directly as a student. His impeccable manners even caught Elias's attention. Even though he'd already made up his mind not to ask questions he shouldn't, and to ignore everything he saw, even yesterday when Lord Glamorgan flirted with Eva McKenna right in front of him, he'd pretended to know nothing. But this child named Hope was clearly from a noble family, and not just any noble. Ever since arriving in Wintertown, Elias had found this place unique. After living there for a while, his questions hadn't diminished, but rather multiplied. People like Mark Watney and Lara Croft, who were clearly not commoners, where did they come from? How could a small village with only a dozen or so farmers attract so many artisans with families? Elias could tell that these artisans weren't just ordinary craftsmen, they possessed exceptional skills. For example, the blacksmith named Will Turner and their leader, Edwin Van Cleef, were so skilled that their expertise would be considered top tier even in the capital. Why would such exceptional artisans choose to live in such a remote place? Furthermore, Edwin Van Cleef was more than just a craftsman. David had recently met with Van Cleef without shying away from Elias, and the ceremonial officer only then realized that Van Cleef, besides being a top-notch stonemason, was also a formidable assassin. Elias's expression was remarkable, his normally calm face a palette of colors, a multitude of emotions simultaneously playing out on the ceremonial officer's face, leaving David observing him with fascination for a long moment. Then came the arrival of the elves Sylvanus and Liadrin. Why were these two elves in Winterhold? Diplomats? Which faction did they represent? The elves of the Ironwood Forest to the south? Wasn't it said that Ironhold and the elves had a bad relationship? And that young man named Renaer Mograine, clearly a powerful knight, but what faction did he represent? And then there was the young woman named Gina Proudmoore. While Winterhold was known for many powerful women, this Gina Proudmoore seemed to be a mage, wasn't she? Elias remembered how the mages had rejected his offer to recruit people in Wintertown back in the capital. The massive metal giant called it ambulance, the various strange facilities, and the child before him, whose origins shone through his mind, didn't seem particularly unusual. Yet, Elias couldn't help but wonder, why would such a well-educated child be in Wintertown? He shifted his gaze slightly, glancing at the young woman named Ilse Corbin. She must have been a formidable knight, even if she wore no armor, only a simple longsword at her waist. While Elias stood aside, lost in thought, David and Eva processed the newly collected population data, focusing primarily on the 4 newly arrived farmers. Eva made a brief note of the individual's information and handed it to David for review. Once David had verified everything was correct, he stamped it and filed it. Speaking of which, with Wintertown's population expected to grow, perhaps we should get some kind of ID currently. Identification in the Kingdom of Tiran consists of a roll of treated paper containing a person's information, usually rolled up and carried in a small tube. This type of ID is inaccurate, easy to forge, and prone to loss and damage, making David somewhat disdainful. It's not that the Kingdom of Tiran lacks better technology. For example, identification for the nobility is far more sophisticated. Besides the specially treated paper, it also includes various special accessories, including rings, to demonstrate their noble status and title. These are simply unavailable to commoners. Is there no need for this right now? Eva sorted through the documents she was handling. She would later hand over several IDs to the new farmers. But as the population grows, it would be beneficial to have more convenient identification to facilitate better governance. However, in my opinion, this can only be implemented after Wintertown is truly established. More specifically, after the server Sheldon wants to build is completed. At that time, a Wintertown population database would be established, storing the residents' personal data. A network signal was also established in Wintertown, allowing anyone within the town to access personal information at any time, greatly facilitating governance. After completing this simple task, David, as usual, toured the town before heading to Will's blacksmith shop to begin his practice. As he practiced, David discovered that he had a considerable talent for blacksmithing, a gift he suspected he had inherited from Will. Furthermore, his Cybertronian body had unexpectedly assisted him in his alchemy studies. He could use it to scan and record, better observing the various transformations of metals, allowing him to more accurately understand and construct his own alchemical runes. At this rate, he would soon be able to construct alchemical runes like forging, quenching, and cooling, eliminating the need for a full year in the blacksmith shop. The combined effect of Will's blacksmithing talent and his Cybertronian body was truly formidable, and David should soon be able to master alchemy. David also had a basic understanding of alchemy and why Newton had sent him to the blacksmith shop to learn. For example, once he has constructed alchemical runes for forging, quenching, and cooling, and arranged them within his alchemical framework to form his own alchemical array, he can use the array to swiftly complete tasks that would normally take a blacksmith many years. By compressing this process to a near instantaneous moment, he has practically entered the realm of alchemy. From there, he continually constructs alchemical runes. These runes might represent intense pressure, electric shock, high temperatures, or a combination of various effects, all designed to transform one object into another. What kind of alchemical runes are needed? Which types of runes are suitable for achieving the desired effect? These are matters that the alchemist must learn and explore. David hasn't reached that level yet. His alchemical runes are limited to altering the appearance of metals. With continued effort, he could create simple alloys through the alchemical array. I wonder if I can create light cast iron and vibranium by then. He already had these two metals in his territory, and both were incredibly powerful. The key lay in his Cybertronian body's ability to transform. Could he, through alchemy, imbue his Cybertronian body with the properties of light cast iron and vibranium? If so, would his strength reach a new level? Looking at the alchemical array between his hands, etched with several alchemical runes, David began to understand why Pierre Newton had been so excited when he first saw the Hammer of Judgment. Even though David hadn't mastered alchemy to that level yet, he couldn't wait to begin analyzing and mastering those exotic metals. For alchemists, studying unknown minerals made them stronger. Putting the alchemical array away, David thought again. Could his Cybertronian body scan vehicles? Could he transform into a vehicle like the Autobots or Decepticons? And was his size too small? David didn't think it was a big deal. After all, the Transformers had their famous Cybertron compression technology. What should we scan to test it? Chapter 150 The Invincible Arsenal. David's options were limited. Wintertown's current mode of transportation consisted of the motorcycle Steve had carried over, the Weasel ultralight armored vehicle Laura had painstakingly transported, and the barely there vehicle Howard had used to test a crystal engine. Then there were the ambulance and the three RC sisters. Could a transformer scan another transformer? David had no idea. Let's scan the Weasel. After finishing his blacksmithing lessons for the day, washing off the sweat, and changing into fresh clothes, David arrived at the warehouse behind Laura's cabin. This warehouse, used to store weapons and the Weasel, looked unsafe. But with Wintertown currently undergoing massive construction, David had no desire to build a new one. He simply waited until the new Wintertown was complete before reorganizing his belongings. He opened the warehouse and transformed into a Cybertronian form. Because David had chosen a human form, the people accompanying him were unaware that their lord had, in that instant, transformed from a carbon-based life form into a silicon-based one. Using his Cybertronian body's built-in scanning function, David initially intended to scan the Weasel tank directly, but he discovered he could also scan for enemy weapons. It was then he remembered that he hadn't scanned any vehicles, not even weapons. If he hadn't come to take a look, he wouldn't have even realized he had no weapons. Both the Autobots and the Decepticons have their own built-in weapons, so why don't I have a default weapons system? Could it be because he was a newborn King Kong? The modules hadn't been loaded or activated? Whatever the reason, David quickly scanned the weapons, and then saw the display screen remind him, the weapon module has been activated. The data for the M1911 pistol and HK416 assault rifle appeared in David's field of view, followed by the Browning heavy machine gun, grenade launcher, and so on. Then, David noticed an image of his own mechanized form appearing on the display screen, allowing him to adjust and redesign the weapon templates based on his own ideas. He quickly determined that his primary weapon was a 12.7mm heavy machine gun, mounted on the outside of his forearm. This meant that both arms could transform and extend into heavy machine gun barrels, firing 12.7mm caliber bullets. Furthermore, Just because David's transformed machine gun only fired bullets of this caliber, it didn't mean it would be as powerful as the original. The specific power depended on the strength of David's own spark. Furthermore, the material used to construct the bullets could be freely adjusted. For example, if David understood the technical details of depleted uranium armor-piercing and tungsten core armor-piercing rounds, he could create these ammunition within his body. Indeed, Transformers could produce live ammunition within their bodies, but there was a limit to how much ammunition they could produce, so running out of ammunition was inevitable during combat. As for where this ammunition was stored, it was, of course, stored using Cybertron compression technology. Does this mean that even powerful ammunition made from crystal ore powder can be generated within the body? Thinking carefully, David realized that crystal ore enhanced ammunition primarily involved attaching energy to the warhead, something he could already do. At this thought, he suddenly understood why the alchemist at Newton had been unable to decipher the mineral crystal ore. According to Sheldon, Mark, and the others, crystal ore is a crystal that contains energy. Its special feature is its large, stable energy content, but otherwise, it's unremarkable. Alchemy itself requires a significant amount of energy to transform objects. Transforming an ordinary object into one that's rich in energy but otherwise unremarkable seems a bit redundant. Enchanting a random stone might be more meaningful. Perhaps the old alchemist at Newton simply couldn't wrap his head around this, and that's why he couldn't understand this mineral. Of course, perhaps the old alchemist was pursuing a higher realm, perhaps trying to understand why this crystal could contain such a large amount of energy so stably. David's mind was swirling with irrelevant thoughts, but it didn't distract him from what he was currently doing. This was the multi-threaded thinking ability granted by his Cybertronian body. By the time he finished thinking about this, he had already scanned every weapon inside and loaded the weapon modules. The image of his mecha form on the screen showed that his arms had transformed into 12.7 mm heavy machine guns on the outside of his forearms. His shoulder blades could transform into grenade launchers capable of firing incendiary rounds, flares, high explosive rounds, and a 20 mm cannon could be extended from his right shoulder, aiming forward. These weapons were normally stored within his torso, and the addition of the weapon modules wouldn't significantly alter his mecha's appearance. He was most curious about transforming into a larger transformer, perhaps up to 7 or 8 meters. Would the caliber of his weapons be proportionally increased? Even if that 20 mm cannon were enlarged fourfold, that didn't seem too much of an exaggeration. He should probably scan for more powerful weapons. What a shame. It seems I can't transform into a weasel or any other vehicle. As the weapon modules activated, David confirmed one thing: his Cybertronian form was currently limited to human and mecha. He couldn't add new transformation templates, and naturally, could transform into vehicle. I hope I can continue to level up. Just as David was debating whether to ask Laura to help him acquire some weapons to transform into an invincible arsenal, not far from Winter Town. Marty, why don't you want to stay in Snowberg? Diogo's face was filled with confusion. He felt that Snowberg was short of manpower and was encouraging new farmers to develop the surrounding land. He and Marty stayed in Snowberg for a while, cultivating the land, and would soon achieve their original goal. Because we said we were going to Winter Town from the beginning, although he had answered similar questions many times, Marty showed no impatience and continued to give the same answer to his only friend. But even if we go to Winter Town, it won't be any different from staying in Snowberg, right? Diogo was extremely confused about what his friend was insisting on. Even if Snowberg is more populated with people developing the land, the village we went to earlier is still a good option, right? This place was already very close to Winter Town. It was said that it would take just over half a day to enter Winter Town's territory. Diogo felt that he and Marty were seeking opportunities to become independent farmers in the north. Not necessarily in Winter Town. The village they had just left was clearly newly built, and there weren't many farmers already clearing the land, so they could easily stay there. Besides, Diogo, being outgoing and friendly, easily made friends. Along the way, he'd heard a lot of unfavorable news about Winter Town. For example, the idle civilians around Iron Tree Keep had practically been swept up by the local nobles. New villages were everywhere across the northern plains, meaning Winter Town, nestled in the far corner of the country, could recruit new farmers from Iron Tree Keep. Those arriving from further afield were also largely snatched up by these villages. After all, everyone came here to make a living. If there was a chance to change their fate, they didn't care whether to open up the land in Winter Town or Snowfort. Furthermore, even the nearby caravans were being intercepted by these villages. An Iron Tree Keep's caravans wouldn't even go to Wintertown. With no caravans heading to Wintertown and little money on hand, the two of them lingered in Snaufrest Castle for a while until they encountered a caravan from the capital, allowing them to catch a ride to Wintertown. This situation filled Diogo with concern for Wintertown's future, and he doubted whether his insistence on going there was the right decision. He had shared all the information with Marty, but his friend remained unmoved, leaving him speechless. Despite his bewilderment, Diogo chose not to abandon his friend, choosing to remain alone in Snaufrest Castle or the previous village. Instead, he and Marty embarked on the journey to Wintertown. As they continued along the caravan's journey, their part-time work as caravan helpers was generally quite leisurely, as long as they didn't encounter bandits or their cart got stuck in a pothole. The only tiring part-time job was helping with the cargo when entering villages and towns. They could even hitch a ride, especially as the caravan's cargo gradually sold out, leaving more and more carts unoccupied. If the leading merchant saw a good profit from this trip, he'd give everyone a small reward. However, it looked like they wouldn't be getting any rewards this time, as they were nearing the remote town of Wintertown, where several other trucks were still laden with goods. Just as Diogo was looking around at the trucks, Marty suddenly said, "We've arrived in Wintertown." "Oh? Really? Let me see." Diogo, looking around, immediately stood up from the truck, wanting to get a better view of their new home, where they would spend the rest of their lives. But after a long glance, he saw nothing, just the same empty grassland. "That's not a joke, I'm not kidding," Marty said, noticing Diogo staring at him speechlessly. He raised his hand and pointed to the side. Diogo followed Marty's hand and saw a lonely sign. With his limited education, he could decipher the words, "Welcome to Wintertown." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.